I, 25 female, lived with my parents, 50 female and 55 male, because it's very close to my service and it's a costly area. It's been a week since I moved out, but I never needed to earlier and my parents didn't ask. So as time went on and I earned more, I put in air conditioning, made my room smart, as well as the house, Alexa, put an excellent shower in the guest bathroom, which I eventually added to my bedroom, and I bought quality furniture for my room, etc. My room turned out to be the best in the house because of my changes, and yes, I paid rent to my parents, quite fat by the way. It's been 3 months since they came to talk to me, saying it was time for me to move because they wanted to have their moment alone now, and I could live on my own. Of course I agreed, after all, and I was just living there for ease and convenience. I found a house and needed to make some changes, so in order to not have to buy it when I have it, I replaced all the sockets, bulbs, switches, smart, and the shower with common ones. I paid for them all, and the increase in energy I paid too. I also removed the air conditioner and paid to plug the hole it left. Also, of course, I took all the furniture in my room and Alexa scattered around the house. My parents started complaining that I shouldn't take everything out as they were in everyday use. They were planning to move into the room that was mine, and with these changes I made my room worse, and the house in general too. It's just not smart. Everything I bought was quality. I said they asked me to move and I'm taking everything I bought because I needed them and had other expenses. I made a payment on the house, and these items were all bought by me, and all the increase in energy I had was paid only by me too, and that if they wanted to buy some, I could help search online, but I would take these items. They called me selfish because I made the house worse and removed these items in everyday use as they became accustomed to the smart home. They complained even more when I didn't want to leave the 65-inch smart TV in my room as a gift for them. I didn't leave it because it's new and it was too expensive. I moved a week ago, but they're still upset. Am I the idiot? Not the idiot. The entitlement of your parents is on another level. What did they expect you to do, OP? Leave all the expensive stuff you bought while paying rent when they told you to leave their house? Your stuff, your money, your rules. Enjoy your new house. We've made enough to retire charging you rent, so get out and leave all your crap for us too. If you were in a regular non-family rental and your landlord asked you to move for some reason, you would take your items and return the property to the previous condition. So you just did the same thing in this situation. You paid rent to your parents. This makes you a tenant, and as one of those, when you move out, you take your stuff. I think your parents used you until you made the house better and then decided to throw you out. They're jerks for assuming you'd leave the stuff you bought with your own money. Common use or not, they can buy smart devices and whatnot on their own if they want them that badly. You are the idiot. The TV and furniture sound reasonable, but you should have asked your parents about the AC. Maybe they could have compensated you for leaving the old one in, or they might have wanted to buy their own unit and use the existing holes. Replacing the light bulbs with random cheaper ones might also not be optimal because they might be unnecessary expenses if your parents would want different ones anyway. Also, maybe it would have been less work to just ask your parents for compensation for everything they want to keep and buy it new. Oh man, you are horrid. Absolutely, you are the idiot. First, you were there until 25, vamping off your parents' final days for your convenience, and then removing anything you had bought, despite subsidizing an unreasonable portion of your adult life. I feel for your parents. What a shame for them. My daughter, 18, graduated high school, and I hung a photo of her graduation party on the living room wall. She wants to go to a community college and will live with me and her stepdad. My husband recently earned his master's degree, and yesterday he showed me his graduation photo that he framed and prepared to hang. I asked where we would hang it, and he said the living room. I said, great, right next to Amy's graduation photo then. He said not next to it, but instead of it. I was puzzled. I asked why, and he said he didn't feel it was right to have his graduation photo, a master's degree, be hung next to a high school graduation photo, a high school degree. He said that both photos have different weight and value and suggested I take my daughter's photo down and hang his instead. I was fuming because he refused to let her photo hang anywhere near his, and he had claimed the entire wall. I refused and said that this photo had been here for months, and my daughter deserves to have it on display for encouragement. He got upset and said that I was making it a big deal and could instead use the hallway or something, but I refused. We argued about it, and he insisted on having her graduation photo be taken down and not hung on the same wall as his, due to the difference in degree value and weight. Also, he thought a high school photo wasn't hang-on wall worthy and called me inconsiderate of his feelings. Finally, he said it was disrespectful to him and his efforts and said that choosing this hill to die on was ridiculous. Am I the idiot for choosing this hill to die on? Not the idiot. I'd hang it right over the toilet where his attitude belongs. So every time he goes, he can be reminded of how much of a pompous idiot he is. I also have a master's degree. I would never be so big-headed to do something like that. Wow, has his masculinity always been this fragile? How old is this man? And why does he think he needs to compete with a teenager? Why is he jealous? This is so strange. Is he also a teenager who excelled so much that he earned his master's at 18? Even if that was the case, he doesn't get to remove your daughter's photo to replace it with his. He sounds like a total idiot. If you get a PhD, will you hang his master's photo in the closet or the basement? Of course he'd pitch a giant fit, and rightly so. Tell your husband that since he got his big boy master's degree, it's time to grow up and recognize that other people have milestones in their lives too, and that the weight and value of such things are not for him to determine. Something that, most people who've graduated elementary school have learned. Your husband just told you your daughter and her accomplishments are meaningless to him, and that she's so beneath him that she's not worthy of sharing wall space with his own. There are massive red flags. However, I will bet that this is not the first red flag. Hang up a copy of the divorce application next to his photo. My 18-year-old son, Eric, just graduated high school. I'm very proud of him because he has ADHD, and school has always been a struggle for him, but he's going to college and his future is promising. I was out with my two girlfriends. Both have children the same age as Eric. Well, I excused myself to the washroom, and right before I was about to go back into the room, I overheard one of them say that I must be so disappointed in Eric. Disappointed because he's not studying law or medicine, etc., like their kids. This got my attention, and I kept listening. They continued to talk about how he barely graduated, and then they made a few odd jokes about how Eric would probably follow in my footsteps and marry a rich older lady. Finally, they talked about my son's reputation and laughed about how he cares more about his face than his future, just like his mother. This hurt me a lot. I was heartbroken. Not only were they insulting me, but also my son. I walked into the room and they were silent, but acted as if they weren't just talking crap. So I didn't mention it and simply decided never to hang out with them ever again. But when I got home, my husband asked me if anything was wrong, and I just began to cry and told him everything. I've been friends with them for a year, and gosh, I don't even know. He was really angry. He had invited them and their families to go on a quick 2-day trip, and he called their husbands and canceled. When they asked why, he told them there was no way he was paying to take two bitter, mean girls that insulted his wife and son on vacation. Well, I got a call from the two, and they were really upset. They said that I needed to tell him to rethink his decision, and that they were just joking around because their kids were looking forward to the trip. I told them that I didn't want to, but they said that I should have talked to them instead of crying to my husband like a weak witch. I told them to screw off, and they replied, "This is exactly why we hate you. Wait, sorry, are you going to go cry to your husband again?" That stung a little, and now I'm wondering if I'm the idiot for not being straight up and crying to my husband instead. My sister agrees that I should have dealt with it myself and that I went too far telling my husband. I mean, it's my sister. I tell her everything. A lot of my previous friends also used to say similar things about me regarding my husband. So after a while, you start to wonder if you're the problem. Not the idiot. I'm just joking is the universal mantra of every idiot bully. You owe them nothing. They're not concerned about their actual friendship with you. They're worried that they lost out on the trip and that they've lost their good reputation. In almost all marriages, you should share with your husband everything. Girls legit just sound jealous of OP's husband. Notice how all their attacks and complaints revolve around OP interacting with her husband. They're just mad that she has a wonderfully supportive partner and they got exposed. So they can't take advantage of OP's husband now. OP, these aren't your friends. Who cares what they think? They insulted your son, called you a gold digger, and then what? They don't expect you to tell your husband what's up? Girl, they just still want your husband to do things for them. It doesn't matter that you cry to your husband about awful people. He's your partner. Just block them and never think about them again. You are a full-grown adult, and I don't understand why you even have to ask this question. You get to have boundaries. Not engaging with people who are cruel and insulting is a very reasonable boundary. Not going on vacation with people who hate you is a very reasonable boundary. You don't have to justify communicating with your husband to anyone, let alone these immature idiots or your gossipy, unsupportive sister. My female father found out that my mother had an affair many years ago with his brother when they were still together. My father became suspicious and pressured all his children to take a DNA test. I was the only one of the 4 who was not biological. This screwed up my relationship with my father. I visited him every weekend, and after the test results, he cut the visits. He always gave some money to his children, but for me, he only gave what he was obliged by law to do. All of my brothers got a car and a trip to another country, a gift divided in half by my parents. I only got a trip because that's what my mother could manage on her own. It hurt to see my brother, 1 year younger, get everything. I lost in 1 month a present, loving, and helpful father, and every time I pointed this out, he told me to understand how hard it was for him to see the fruit of my mother's betrayal and that she lied to him for years, taking advantage of the similarity between him and his brother. For over 5 years, he barely spoke to me, beyond the basics, and excluded me from everything. Parties. It hurt a lot. After 5 years, under the influence of my stepmother, he had more contact with me, but we were no longer the same. Our relationship has always been rocky after that. The situation. I'm getting married to my beautiful bride in a few months, and we're getting ready for the ceremony/party. My father insisted on giving funds, a lot, to help, and although I didn't want to, I did accept it as long as there were no strings attached. Somehow, I think one of my brothers, he found out that he wouldn't walk me down the aisle, and he had a meltdown. He said that this was our moment as we planned it when I was younger, and that it was his dream to walk his only daughter down the aisle. At some point, he talked about helping at the party, which was the trigger. I said he forfeited that right by setting me aside for 5 years for something I wasn't guilty of, so I prefer to go alone. He again began to say that I should understand his feelings, that it was a very difficult time for him, and that he accepted me. I exploded, saying that I didn't give a crap about his feelings because he just ignored that he had raised me for 17 years and then treated me like it was an obligation. He looked shocked, and then he left. My stepmother called me later, saying that I broke my father's heart doing and saying all this, and that he is human, he can make mistakes, and that he was trying his best to make up for the lost time. Am I the idiot? Not the idiot. Your father took out his feelings of betrayal on an innocent child. He was the adult. You were the child. Yes, he was suffering, but you were still his responsibility, not just for stuff, but as a parent and for your mental and emotional health. He made a choice to abandon you when you needed him. That did damage he can't expect to disappear because he wanted to. He can't expect to have the rewards of good parenting when he was a bad parent to you during those years. Actions have consequences. I hate see it from my perspective people because they never see it from the perspective of others. They demand people give them so many chances, but refuse to understand their actions have consequences. Sure, yeah, the dad was going through a lot of crap in his life at the time, but he actively, emotionally destroyed a child for his own selfish reasons, and then demanded that the kid be suddenly fine with him because things were hard for him. Things were hard for OP, specifically because of him. He doesn't get to go unring that bell. That's solely on him and not you. I hope you have a great wedding and that this doesn't overshadow everything. My parents are terrible at managing money. When I, 27 female, was little, my father gambled away all the savings, about $100,000 in risky penny stocks, which got wiped out in 2008, and we were forced to move into a single bedroom in a house for the three of us. Then my mom fell for an MLM, and you can imagine what happened. They lost the down payment to the house they were saving for. I begged them not to sign up for it since I saw it was a scam and showed them evidence it was, and they just laughed at me and ignored me. They lost about $28,000 from that. Then recently, they fell for a college sign-up scam and lost $32,000. They weren't signing up for college. They just needed a loan and tried to go through a private broker who promised to get them a school loan that they could use on whatever they wanted. I went with them to see this broker and told them it was a scam, and they ignored me. So basically, they were trying to scam the government and got scammed instead. I tried to pry the pen away from my father's hands when I got desperate as he was writing down his bank info and SSA, and he screamed at me that I was embarrassing him and did it anyway. Again, they lost money, and now they're homeless because their credit is crap, and they can barely afford even crappy apartments. They probably can't get that money back since they have little documentation on the broker and what he promised. So now they live in their car and are begging me for money. I have about $100,000 saved, waiting to buy a house, and they know about it because I stupidly told them I was saving for a house, and now they're calling me and showing up at my apartment asking for money. They also want to move in the meantime, but my roommate and I agreed that visitation from friends or family is max 1 week to prevent resentment, and if my parents move in, they'll probably refuse to move out. They're going to food pantries, and honestly, I can't find it in myself to be that sympathetic since they don't listen to me until they need my money. Am I the idiot for not helping my parents when they're homeless? Not the idiot. Do not give them money. You know exactly what's going on. You know what'll happen. You cannot save them from themselves. They are a bottomless pit, and they will bleed you dry and still end up homeless. Please don't give them a cent. Don't let them through your door. Don't do laundry for them. Don't take them food. I've seen so many situations where kids who have worked hard to overcome their upbringings have been sucked back in and have ended up stressed and with no money. You can probably tell it makes my blood pressure increase just to read your story. Make sure your credit is on lockdown. Parents will typically have everything they need to open an account in their children's names. However, if you don't give them anything, and you shouldn't, they may take it upon themselves to get something from you. Lock it down. I'm sorry, but your instincts are right on the money. Your parents require help, but not the kind of help they want from you. For now, you're relatively safe, thanks to your rule with your roommate. But when you get your own house, I'd consider not giving them your address to avoid harassment. They've ruined their lives. Don't let them do the same to yours.
How many men out there can honestly say their wife is popular? And I don't mean famous or anything. I'm talking about a woman who has this magnetic energy that draws people, and a woman who walks into a room and people notice. Men notice. That was my wife, Emily. She didn't have a massive online following or a high-powered career, but wherever she went, she just had that presence. You know, the kind that makes heads turn. And believe me, I noticed. We got married in our mid-20s, and now we're pushing 40. We met in college. She was the bubbly, outgoing girl who could light up any room, and I was the quieter, more introverted guy. Opposites attract, right? At first, everything was good, great even. We had that spark. And then we got married, bought a house, had 2 beautiful daughters. The typical suburban dream. I worked your standard office job. 9 to 5, decent pay, benefits, the whole package. Emily stayed home for the most part, at least when the girls were younger. She'd take on part-time work here and there, mostly just helping out an elderly neighbor or picking up odd jobs when she felt like it. Our marriage, though, it was fine. That's the best way I can describe it, fine. Nothing was wrong per se, but nothing was amazing either. We weren't those couples who are all over each other, but we weren't fighting either. We just kind of existed in this space, raising the kids, paying the bills, making life work. The sex was still happening, but let's be honest, it wasn't like the early days. It was routine like everything else. I guess, looking back, I ignored the signs because they weren't obvious. Not at first. Emily started going out more. Sometimes it was for groceries, sometimes to meet a friend for coffee, or she'd say she was taking a walk. Nothing out of the ordinary, except these little trips got longer. I just ran into so-and-so, she'd say when she got back. Or, the line at the store was crazy. I didn't think much of it. I mean, we've been married for over a decade. I trusted her. She was a good wife, a great mom. Why would I doubt her? But slowly, I started noticing the changes. There were more nights where she'd be out later than usual. More nights where she'd come home, and I'd ask, "How was your day?" And her answer would feel rehearsed, like she had already thought about what she was going to say. Then there were the phone calls. She'd be on her phone a lot more than before, texting and smiling at her screen like a teenager. At first, I thought it was just her keeping in touch with friends or planning some mom's night out. But when I leaned in once, just casually trying to kiss her goodnight, she pulled away saying, "Not now, I'm tired." It stung, but I brushed it off. People get tired. I was tired too. But the phone, it kept pinging, more and more messages, mostly in the evenings when we'd sit on the couch together. I'd be watching TV, and she'd be scrolling, her attention completely absorbed by whatever was on that tiny screen. And it wasn't just the usual social media stuff, it was messages. I started glancing over casually at first, just to see who she was talking to. But she was always quick to close her phone when I got too close. That's when the knot in my stomach started forming, but I kept telling myself, "Nah, it's nothing. You're being paranoid." I didn't realize just how much of an idiot I was until one night I caught her on the phone late when she thought I was asleep. It was a low, whispered conversation. I couldn't make out much, but I heard enough. Enough to know it wasn't her mother or a friend from work. "You know, I can't right now. He's still awake. Maybe tomorrow." I felt the cold sweat form on my forehead. I wanted to barge in, demand to know who she was talking to, but instead, I just lay there pretending to be asleep, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. Could she be cheating? No, not Emily. She wouldn't do that. Would she? The next morning, everything was back to normal, or at least it seemed that way. She was chipper, getting the kids ready for school, kissing me goodbye as if nothing had happened. But something had shifted. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on behind my back. I started paying more attention, noticing every small detail, every tiny thing that seemed off. I started asking more questions, subtle at first. "Who were you talking to last night?" Or "Where exactly did you go today?" But she always had an answer ready, like she had rehearsed it. "Oh, just a friend," or "I went for a walk, nothing special." But it was something. It was everything. And then one night it happened. I was cleaning up after dinner, and her phone buzzed on the counter. She was in the other room, so I grabbed it, figuring I'd just hand it to her. But then I saw the name. It wasn't one of her friends or her mom. It was a guy. I didn't recognize the name at first, but something in my gut told me to open the message. And that's when I saw it. The flirty texts, the inside jokes, the winking emojis. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My wife, the mother of my kids, the woman I thought I knew, was having some kind of affair. My hands were shaking as I put the phone back down, trying to act normal as she walked into the kitchen. I couldn't even look at her. Everything was more complicated than I'd thought. For weeks, that feeling in my gut kept growing, gnawing at me, but I couldn't pin it down. I mean, sure, I'd found those texts on her phone, and yeah, they were suspicious, but part of me was still holding out, trying to convince myself that it wasn't what it seemed. One day, we were out shopping, just a regular trip to the store to pick up groceries. Nothing special, nothing out of the ordinary. I was pushing the cart while Emily wandered off between the aisles, looking for something. As I turned a corner, I spotted someone out of the corner of my eye. It was a guy I hadn't seen in years, an old friend from back in the day. Let's call him Tom. Tom was standing near the shelves, but there was something strange about the way he was moving, like he was trying to avoid being seen. He was peeking around, ducking behind a display like he didn't want anyone to notice him. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Why would Tom be hiding in a grocery store? Curiosity got the better of me, so I left the cart and walked over to him. "Tom!" I called out. He jumped slightly, but turned and smiled when he saw me. "Oh, hey, long time no see, man." We greeted each other, but something felt off. He was too cheerful, like he was putting on an act. I glanced around to see if Emily had spotted us, but she was off in another aisle, completely unaware. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to make sense of why he was acting so strange. Yeah, I'm good," he said, but his eyes darted around nervously. I actually wanted to talk to you." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "Not here," he muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "Let's meet later. There's a bar near the strip mall. You know the one. We can talk there. Tonight?" I wasn't sure what to make of it. Tom had always been the outgoing type, never the kind of guy who'd act all jumpy. I hesitated for a moment, not really wanting to get involved in whatever this was. But something in his voice caught my attention. He seemed urgent, and frankly, I was curious. What had happened to him? Why was he acting so strange? "All right," I said, though not entirely willing. "I'll meet you there." That evening, after putting the kids to bed and telling Emily I had some errands to run, I headed to the bar. I found Tom sitting at a corner table, already a beer in front of him. The moment I walked in, I noticed he wasn't the same guy from earlier. The nervousness was gone. He looked more confident, more put together. It was like the grocery store thing never happened. "Glad you made it," he said as I sat down. "I've been thinking about you." "Thinking about me?" I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I remember our friendship, he said, taking a long sip of his beer. "And I want to help you." I leaned back, confused. "Help me with what?" "Everything's fine, man." He gave me a look, one that told me he knew more than I did. "Listen, I'm not trying to make this awkward, but something's been going on. Something you should know about." Now I was hooked. My stomach tightened as I waited for him to continue. He pulled out a business card and slid it across the table toward me. I glanced down at it. It was for some massage place in town. "Massage studio? What's this got to do with anything?" "I've seen your wife there," he said, his voice low, almost cautious. "Yes, so?" "She goes there sometimes," I replied. "She gets those spa treatments, facials, massages, the usual stuff. It's nothing new." Tom shook his head. "No, man. I mean, she works there." I stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" "She doesn't have any massage training. Why would she be working there?" He let out a sigh, his eyes not leaving mine. "It's not that kind of massage, man. It's a different kind of place." It took a second for his words to sink in. "What do you mean, different?" Tom looked uncomfortable, but he didn't hold back. "I mean, it's a massage parlor, but with extras. You know what I mean? A massage that ends with a little more than just a back rub. It's all under the table, but they've got women working there who do it for cash. I've seen your wife there, and I talked to one of the girls who works there. She said your wife's on a floating schedule, shows up when she can." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My brain couldn't process what he was telling me. My wife, Emily, working in a place like that? No way. It didn't make sense. "You're sure it was her?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tom nodded. "I wouldn't lie to you about something like this. I saw her, and I asked around. It's her." The room felt like it was closing in on me. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands felt cold. I didn't know what to do, what to think. Emily? Working there? Why? For money? Was that what all those extra part-time jobs had really been about? I had so many questions, but no answers. "I'm sorry, man," Tom said, finishing his drink and standing up. "I thought you deserved to know." As I left the bar, I felt like I was walking in a daze. I had no idea what to do with this information. My wife, the mother of my kids, was doing this for money? What the hell was happening to my life? I didn't know what to do. Tom's words kept echoing in my head. My wife, working in a place like that? I couldn't wrap my mind around it. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, but something stopped me. What if Tom was wrong? What if there was a logical explanation? If I accused her and it turned out to be false, it would blow everything up for no reason. I couldn't risk that, so I made a decision. I wouldn't tell her. Not yet. I needed to find out for myself. The next day, when Emily left for one of her usual errands, I waited. I sat there, staring at the clock, each minute dragging by as I tried to calm the storm of thoughts in my head. After half an hour, I grabbed my keys and headed to the massage place Tom had mentioned. When I walked in, the place seemed normal enough. The receptionist smiled at me like I was just another client. "Can I help you?" she asked. Yeah, I stammered. "Is anyone free for a massage?" She looked at the schedule, then nodded. "Yes, we have availability. If you'd like to come in and lie down, we'll have someone with you shortly." I followed her instructions, my heart pounding in my chest as I was led to a dimly lit room. The soft hum of spa music played in the background, and the scent of lavender filled the air. I took off my shirt, hesitated for a moment, then undressed completely and lay down on the massage table, face down. What was I doing? I still wasn't sure if I wanted to go through with this. A few minutes later, the door opened, and a woman walked in. But she wasn't who I expected. She was older than me by quite a bit. Actually, probably in her late 50s or early 60s. She said nothing at first, just started rubbing oil on my back, working her hands into the muscles. It was a regular massage, nothing suspicious. I felt a little relieved. "So," she said after a few moments, "what kind of massage are you looking for today? We have therapeutic, relaxing, or maybe you want something a little more special." I froze for a second. There it was. This was exactly what Tom had been talking about. I cleared my throat, trying to sound casual. Yeah, maybe something more." Without a word, she stopped what she was doing and left the room. My heart was racing now. I wasn't sure what I had just agreed to, but there was no turning back. A few minutes later, the door opened again, and this time, it wasn't the older woman. A much younger woman walked in, probably in her late 20s, wearing tight leggings and a tank top. She smiled, a knowing look in her eyes, and without saying anything, she started the massage. Her hands moved over my body, but this wasn't like the first massage. It was softer, slower, more deliberate. The tension in the room shifted immediately. I won't go into details, but it didn't take long before it became clear that this wasn't just a massage. It ended exactly how I had feared it might, and to my surprise, I didn't stop it. In fact, I went along with it. I let it happen, and as it was happening, I couldn't deny that it felt good. Too good. When it was over, I got dressed in silence. I handed the woman her payment, tipped generously, and walked out the door like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. As I stepped outside, the guilt hit me all at once. I had just betrayed my wife. I did the very thing I feared she was doing to me. I had sunk to that level without even knowing the truth. If Tom was wrong, if my wife wasn't involved in this place, then I had just destroyed something for no reason. I couldn't think straight. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with a million thoughts. What the hell had I done? And more importantly, what was I going to do next? When I got home, the house was quiet. Emily hadn't returned yet, and the kids were still at school. I sat down at the kitchen table, trying to process everything, my hands shaking slightly as I replayed what had just happened. Was this what Emily was doing behind my back? Or was I just projecting, letting my fears push me into something I shouldn't have done? Either way, I was left with one brutal truth. I wasn't innocent anymore. I sat in that dark room, the dim light casting long shadows across the walls, my heart racing so fast I could feel it pounding in my chest. I had planned this moment in my head 1,000 different ways, but now that it was about to happen, nothing felt right. My fingers tapped against my knee as I waited, the silence in the room feeling heavier by the second. I couldn't believe I was here again. The massage parlor. Her workplace apparently, I had gone through so many emotions over the last 24 hours that I barely knew which way was up. Anger, hurt, betrayal, and now, as I waited for her to walk through that door, a kind of bitter anticipation. Last night had been a revelation. I had waited until Emily was fast asleep, breathing softly next to me in bed, and then I did it. I went through her phone. I know some people would say that's crossing a line, that it's a violation of privacy, but after everything I'd seen, after what Tom had told me, I didn't care. I needed to know the truth. My fingers had shaken as I scrolled through her messages. First, I found the ones with the massage parlor. It was all there like a punch to the gut. The shifts, the appointments with VIP clients. And it wasn't just work. These messages were explicit. They weren't talking about deep tissue massages or aromatherapy. It was all about keeping the clients happy, giving them what they paid for. I felt sick reading it, seeing my wife talk about herself like that, like a commodity to be bought and sold. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was finding the other messages. The ones from him. Mike. I didn't know who he was at first, just another name in her phone. But as I scrolled through their conversations, it became painfully clear. He wasn't just a client. He was more than that. There was tenderness in their messages, affection. They weren't just arranging meetings. They were talking late at night, joking, flirting. I read through each text with a growing pit in my stomach. This wasn't just about money for Emily. She had feelings for this guy. It wasn't just sex. It was emotional. I wanted to throw her phone across the room. I wanted to scream, to wake her up and confront her right then and there. But I didn't. I kept my cool somehow. I knew if I blew up now, I wouldn't get the full truth. And part of me still couldn't fully accept it. Maybe there was some other explanation. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. I needed to see it with my own eyes. So I came here to the massage parlor to see what was really going on, to see if Emily, no, Sabrina, as they called her here, would actually walk through that door. The minutes ticked by, and finally, the door creaked open. Emily stepped into the room, her eyes on the ground as she entered, probably expecting another client. She hadn't noticed me yet. When she finally looked up, our eyes met and she froze. She stopped dead in her tracks, her face draining of color as she realized it was me sitting there, not some random stranger looking for a special massage. "Dubbish, what are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't move. I just stared at her, letting the silence stretch between us until it was unbearable. Finally, I spoke, my voice low and steady, though I could feel the anger simmering just below the surface. "You tell me," I said coldly. "Or should I call you Sabrina now?" She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. She was cornered, and we both knew it. There was no escaping this. "We need to talk about this," she finally managed, her voice trembling. "Talk," I scoffed. "Talk about what?" "About how you've been lying to me for God knows how long. About how you've been sneaking around behind my back, working in a place like this with clients." I practically spat the word out, my voice rising with each sentence. Emily took a step forward, her hands out as if she was trying to calm me down. "It's not what you think," she started, but I wasn't having any of it. "Not what I think?" I shot back, standing up from the massage table. "I know exactly what this is. I've seen the messages, Emily. I know what you do here. VIP clients? Special massages? What the hell is going on with you?" Her face twisted in pain as she realized just how much I knew. I was going to tell you. I didn't want it to happen this way. I let out a bitter laugh. "Tell me? You were going to tell me? When? After another night of lying to me? After another shift here, pretending you're out running errands?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. "You know what? It's not just about the money, is it? It's not just the work. It's him." "Who's Mike, Emily? Or should I say Sabrina?" She flinched at the name. It's not what you think," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Bullshit." My voice was cold, unrecognizable even to me. You've been talking to him. I read the texts. You're in love with this guy, aren't you? You've been screwing around behind my back with him. She shook her head, the tears now streaming down her face. No, I swear it's not like that. It's complicated. I didn't want to hear any more. The anger was boiling over now, and I couldn't stop myself. Complicated? I roared. No, Emily, it's not complicated. You've been lying to me. You've been cheating on me emotionally, physically, I don't even know anymore. And for what? For some guy you met in this sleazy place? She was sobbing now, but I didn't care. I had said everything I needed to say. Without another word, I turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind me. But as I walked out of that place, rage still burning in my chest, I knew I wasn't done yet. There was something else I needed to do. Something final. I couldn't just let this end here. As I stormed out of the room, my heart still pounding from the argument with Emily, I was seething. The betrayal, the lies, it was all too much. My mind was racing, and I knew I couldn't just leave things like this. Not after everything I'd discovered. I wanted her to feel the consequences, and not just her. I wanted that whole disgusting operation to burn. Before I reached the exit, something caught my eye. A fire alarm button, right there in the corridor. It was like fate had put it there just for me, offering a perfect distraction. I glanced around. Nobody was paying attention. The receptionist had disappeared somewhere into the back of the building, probably dealing with another VIP client. I didn't think twice. I pressed the fire alarm. Immediately, the building erupted in chaos. The piercing sound of the alarm blared through the walls, and within seconds, I saw the receptionist rushing toward the back of the building, shouting something about evacuating. Perfect. They'd be too distracted now to notice what I was about to do. I made my way over to the front desk, where a laptop sat open. It took me less than a minute to sit down and start searching. My fingers flew over the keys, my heart racing even faster than before. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about taking down the whole damn place. I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to expose all of it. After a few minutes of digging, I found what I was looking for. The customer data. It was right there, all neatly stored in a folder labeled something innocent like client records. I clicked on it, and there it was: names, phone numbers, appointments. Everything. These weren't just random people coming in for massages. These were powerful men, influential people. I could barely believe what I was seeing. I took out my phone and snapped pictures of the screen, making sure to capture every detail. It only took a few moments, but it felt like forever. Just as I was about to leave, I saw another folder, this one labeled staff. I opened it, and there was again a goldmine of information. Employee records, photos, schedules. Every woman who worked there, including Sabrina. I snapped pictures of those files too. If this place was going down, I was taking every last person involved with it. I slipped out of the building, blending in with the people streaming out due to the fire alarm. The chaos worked in my favor. Nobody noticed me. Nobody had any reason to suspect I'd done anything other than evacuate like everyone else. But I had what I needed, and I was about to set a chain of events in motion that would destroy everything. Later that evening, after I'd calmed down, I knew exactly who to contact. There was a journalist I knew, an old friend who had a nose for stories like this, scandals involving rich and powerful people. He had taken down some big names before, and I knew he'd love to sink his teeth into this. I sent him a message, brief but clear. I've got something you'll want to see. It's big. Call me. When he did, I laid it all out for him. I didn't mention Emily. No, that part was personal, and I wanted to keep it that way. But I told him everything about the massage parlor, about the VIP clients, the hidden services, and I gave him the data I'd stolen. I told him to sit on it for now, but once the cops raided the place, I wanted it all out in the open. Names, details, everything. He was silent for a moment, then said, "This could make a lot of people very unhappy. But I'll do it." Satisfied, I hung up. The next step was easy. I dialed the number for the police, keeping my voice low, disguising it as best I could. It was an anonymous tip, and I told them everything. The location, the illegal activities, the VIP clientele, and even hinted at how deep this could go. I didn't mention Emily by name, of course. This was about more than just her now. It only took 15 minutes for the police to show up. I watched from a distance as squad cars rolled in, lights flashing. Officers piled out, heading straight for the front door. It was chaos all over again, but this time, it wasn't a drill. This time, it was real. The next few days were a whirlwind. The story blew up fast, thanks to my journalist friend. Once the raid was confirmed, he published everything. It made headlines almost immediately. The place was exposed for what it truly was, a front for prostitution, catering to high-paying clients who thought they could get away with anything. But not this time. The client list went public, and the fallout was swift. Names of politicians, businessmen, even a few local celebrities. They were all dragged through the mud. And as for the owners of that business, they were arrested within days. The police uncovered everything: illegal records, payments under the table, and all the services they had been hiding for years. The whole operation was torn apart, and the people who ran it were sent straight to jail. I should have felt relief, maybe even satisfaction. After all, I had gotten my revenge. The place that had torn my life apart was gone, and everyone involved was facing consequences. But as I sat there, scrolling through the news on my phone, reading about the raid and the arrests, there was a hollowness inside me. Emily, or Sabrina, whatever she wanted to call herself now, was part of that world. And no matter how much destruction I caused, no matter how many people I took down with me, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The fallout from everything that happened was swift and brutal. Once the story hit the news, there was no hiding it. No chance for Emily, or Sabrina as they called her, to explain away the truth. The leaked client list, the police raid, the exposed operation, it was all too much for her to avoid. The scandal wasn't just a local story anymore. People I hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out, asking if the rumors were true, asking if my wife was part of it. At first, I didn't want to tell anyone. It felt too personal, too raw. But the truth was already out there, and trying to hide from it wasn't going to change anything. Friends, neighbors, even some colleagues found out through the leaks. Her name didn't appear directly in the headlines, but the whispers, the rumors, they spread like wildfire. People talked. Our mutual friends, the ones who had been close to us for years, turned their backs on her almost immediately. They couldn't believe it. Some of them were genuinely shocked, asking me if it was really true. Others were quick to condemn her without even trying to understand. I wasn't sure if they were disgusted by her actions or just afraid of being associated with such a public mess. Either way, they cut her off entirely. Emily became a pariah, and I could see the weight of that judgment crushing her. As for me, I felt numb through most of it. The divorce process moved faster than I expected. Maybe it was because there was no saving face for her after everything came out, or maybe it was because I was so determined to be done with it. Either way, we didn't fight over much. I think we both knew there was no point. Emily tried at first to talk to me, to explain things, to apologize. But I wasn't interested in her explanations. I'd already made up my mind. I didn't need to hear why she'd done what she'd done. The betrayal was too deep for me to care about her reasons. We finalized the divorce quietly, and as far as I was concerned, that was the end of it. I didn't want to look back. I didn't want to dwell on what had happened, or what I had done in return. The revenge, the exposure, it had given me some satisfaction, but it didn't undo the damage. It didn't erase the feeling of being betrayed by someone I'd trusted for so long. After the divorce was finalized, I made a conscious decision to move on. I focused on my work, threw myself into staying busy, and tried to rebuild my life piece by piece. I didn't want to be the guy who let a failed marriage define him. I had too much ahead of me to stay stuck in the past. And surprisingly, things got better. slowly at first, but then all at once. The weight that had been hanging over me for so long started to lift. I reconnected with old friends, started going out more, and focused on being there for my kids. They were my priority, and I wanted to make sure they knew that no matter what had happened between their mother and me, I would always be there for them. Life started to look brighter. I felt like I could breathe again, like I wasn't constantly waiting for the next bomb to drop. I wasn't looking over my shoulder anymore, wondering what secrets were lurking in the shadows. I had faced them all, and I had come out on the other side. People asked me how I was doing, expecting me to be bitter or broken. But I wasn't. I told them I was fine, better than fine, actually, and it was true. I had survived the worst of it, and now I was moving forward. As for Emily, well, I don't know what she's doing now, and honestly, I don't care. We're no longer part of each other's lives, and that's how it needs to be. I've heard bits and pieces from mutual acquaintances. Apparently, she's trying to start over somewhere new, but it's hard to shake the stigma of what happened. She lost a lot in the fallout, and her reputation is probably damaged beyond repair. But that's her burden to carry, not mine. Me? I'm doing well now. I've got a new routine, new goals, and a clearer perspective on what matters. I'm not angry anymore. I don't dwell on what happened. I let it go. So, to anyone reading this, wondering if things ever get better after something like this, they do. It's not easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. But eventually, you find your footing again. You find yourself again. And to those who stood by me, who didn't turn their backs when the storm hit, thank you. I owe you more than I can say. As for the rest, well, life moves on, and so do I. Good luck to all of you.
My wife cheated and proposed an open marriage to keep her affair going, so I ended it walked away. I gazed at my wife of 5 years and declared, "Aaron, it's either him or me, no middle ground." She sat beside my supposed boss, Plato Giannis, grasping his well-groomed hand, until I spoke. As I uttered those words, she withdrew her hand, confusion and fear etching her beautiful face. She shook her head in surprise, causing her blonde hair to gleam in the lamp. "Just for the weekend, come Monday, everything returns to normal. Can't you enjoy some time with Elle for now?"
Elle is Elle Logan, real name Ellen Johnson, now seated next to me.
She has been fervently trying to seduce me for the past few hours. A striking woman with luscious dark hair and one of the most enviable bodies globally, especially if you appreciate curves, which I certainly do. Rumors also circulate that she's top-notch. It's all part of Plato's jest. When Aaron and I were invited to this for a weekend, the assumption was he wanted to familiarize himself with me better. I'm a renowned author, and he acquired the publishing company that released my work about 3 months ago. However, the entire weekend was actually orchestrated for PL to have relations with my wife. I'm an average writer, penning detective novels and thrillers featuring my protagonist, Rick Rocker. He unravels mysteries of locked rooms and takes daring leaps off cliffs to elude lunatics. His bed life is diverse and exciting, effortlessly charming beautiful women, a martial arts expert and trained assassin. He's a jack of all trades. He's a fantasy wrapped in a thin layer of reality. And my books sell reasonably well, though the publishing house boasts several more significant and better-selling authors. I only have a captivating wife who caught Plato's attention. They crossed paths at a grand dinner and dance organized by Mr. G for his group of writers and editors. The event made an impression on Aaron, especially when she danced with Mr. G to multiple musical numbers. Polished and a decade senior to year-old Aaron, he possessed long dark hair and a commanding presence. Observing their dance, I noted his adept movements. When the group took a break, they returned to our table, and Mr. G expressed admiration for Aaron, stating that she danced beautifully. I merely nodded, and my lack of response momentarily puzzled him. He then mentioned attending to other guests, saying it was a pleasure. Aaron smiled and reciprocated with Plato. I scrutinized her, noting the swift transition from Mr. G to Plato. I inquired if she was impressed with my boss, to which she replied positively, accompanied by a lascivious grin. I suggested, "Let's see whose wife he manages to snag, huh?" She turned out to be the wife of one of the editors, and during the evening, 3 more revealed they were editors' wives. All of this unfolded a month ago. I am Donald Lake, and I have no nickname. Standing at about 6 feet and weighing 169 lbs, I have curly brown hair, blue eyes, and am 30 years old. I am in good physical shape and athletic. Erin, too, is in good shape and practices fencing, a sport of skill and coordination. It was at a fencing lesson she taught that I first met her. I was conducting the usual research for Rick, who was to engage in sword fights in the next book. The adventurer, I always undertake extensive research before writing an adventure book, a key selling point of mine. Rick doesn't do anything I haven't tried. My journey to becoming a writer was an ascent up a steep staircase. I graduated from high school and did not pursue formal education thereafter. In fact, since I was 10, I recognized myself as a writer. Throughout school, I penned story after story, with 2 published in obscure literary magazines during high school. Despite considering myself a serious writer, the need to work for a living arose after finishing school. I worked as a car mechanic, which I enjoyed. However, it didn't pay much, prompting me to start writing thrillers. Miraculously, one sold, followed by another and another. My current publisher signed me after receiving my first Rick Rocker novel. Sally Baker became my editor, and we quickly found common ground. A sweetheart, but deeply married. She had elementary school-age children. While working on the second Rocker book, I met Erin. I completed the book after receiving advice from her about a sword duel, and our professional relationship evolved into several dates, eventually leading to closeness. Our connection was immediate, and we both were delighted. At the time, Erin operated her music store, surviving the initial stages of starting a business thanks to loans from a family trust. The store featured various instruments in one section and recordings of diverse music, along with sheet music in the other. So, fencing is just a hobby. When we got married, she was 23, and I was as happy as I thought it was possible to be. We had plans for children, and very soon. But my publishing house was sold to Mr. G, or Plato as Erin calls him. One day, Erin came home excited, mentioning that next weekend, Plato had invited us to his island. I stared at her, questioning why she was telling me instead of him. Erin explained that she ran into him last week, had lunch, and gave him a tour of the store. Today, he called with an invitation, expressing his desire to get to know the writers better. Erin suggested he would be in contact with me soon. Curious, I asked if he had been in contact with her and others. She reassured me, denying any inappropriate contact. I insisted on knowing why she didn't mention the lunch and shopping until today, and she admitted that he had made advances, but she blew him off. She kept quiet, thinking I might get in trouble given his ownership of the company. Now, with my apparent enthusiasm for the island visit, Erin disclosed that it would be just the 2 of us and a special friend of his, along with the staff, to get to know us better. I remarked cynically about his intentions to get to know everyone. Erin reassured me, stating that she could handle the situation and questioned if I was sure I could handle it. I assured her that everything would be great. However, I firmly declared my decision to decline the invitation, deeming it too dangerous for us. Erin pleaded for reconsideration, expressing that we would have fun, but I remained resolute, apologizing for my decision. She sulked for the rest of the evening. The next day, I called the main office and requested to speak with Mr. G. He returned my call 15 minutes later, expressing anticipation for our weekend on the island. I declined, stating my discomfort. I mentioned that it seemed my wife knew about it before me, having had lunch with him, and she didn't inform me initially. According to her, he had been pestering her, and she was concerned about my reaction if I knew everything. He acknowledged his appreciation for Erin on various levels, citing her attractiveness and entrepreneurial qualities. He also mentioned my status as one of his most profitable writers. He claimed a desire to get to know both of us better. Despite his efforts, I maintained my stance, apologizing and asserting that it would not work. Disappointed, he expressed regret and stated that he wished I would change my mind. He mentioned keeping the weekend open. At that point, we parted ways. About 3 hours later, as I finished the next Rick book, my agent, Brock Levan, contacted me. I inquired about how he knew about my declining Mr. G's invitation. Brock explained that the vice president of sales had called him, insisting that I should attend. He conveyed the potential consequences of under-advertising the new book, which would be detrimental to both of us financially. I questioned if there was a direct threat, and Brock clarified that while not explicit, the threat was implied, emphasizing that Mr. G played a tough game. I assured Brock that I would be in touch. After ending the call, I emailed Sally the conclusion of the new book, along with some instructions. Later, she called, and we discussed the situation. In the meantime, I delved into researching Plato Giannis and his island. The island was named Hedonism, meaning pleasure in Greek, essentially Pleasure Island. As I delved deeper, I uncovered numerous stories of coital misconduct on the island, including 2 divorce cases where the island was cited as a factor. However, these stories were published in gossip sources. Several photographs of Mr. G with women, including 2 married ones, raised serious concerns for me. I located a picture of the place on Google Maps and familiarized myself with the entire layout. Situated off the coast of North Carolina among islands popular for golf and beach holidays, this 2-mile-long and approximately 1-mile-wide island faces south and is shielded from the elements. It boasts 2 piers, multiple buildings, including a large house, tennis courts, and a swimming pool, leaving me puzzled about the need for a pool with great beaches around. I downloaded detailed photos and compiled them into a topographic map, concluding that a decent boat or seaplane would be necessary for the journey. Lacking both, I know people who possess them. On that Friday evening, Erin returned home promptly, appearing joyful for dinner. I had a substantial chicken salad in white. As Erin changed, she mentioned hearing that I might have reconsidered not going to the island. I looked at her, remembering Peel's mention of changing one's mind at lunch. She clarified, "No, silly, he's in New York and we're here in good old Virginia." He called me, mentioning his apartment in Milan. Questioning how she knew he was in New York, I was met with a dismissal of paranoia. Erin explained that Plato suggested ordering his plane from the national airport if we agreed to go, but reiterated that I hadn't changed my mind. Frustrated, Erin called me stubborn and suggested she could go alone, but I expressed concerns about enjoying myself and fearing potential divorce. I inquired about the possibility of her sleeping with him, to which Erin responded that she wouldn't go without me. I questioned how I could let her go alone, emphasizing potential consequences upon her return and the risk of our relationship being jeopardized. Erin affirmed her attraction but assured me that we were still passionate and she wouldn't take the risk. Believing her, I asked if she believed it. To which she replied, not to believe her at all, acknowledging that my trust was almost empty. An accidental spill of wine during this conversation led to laughter, hugs, and kisses, culminating in a trip upstairs lasting an hour. The unpleasant topic faded. As we lay in bed, Erin asserted she wouldn't risk our relationship for a billionaire, seemingly assuming that we would go to the island. Erin commented that it was decided. Tensing but not elaborating further, I inquired about her eagerness for the trip, urging her to provide the truth. After a moment of silence, she explained that it seemed exciting to communicate with such an important and influential person. She quickly clarified that she didn't mean be with, but rather communication. Reflecting on the situation, I noted that he was born into wealth and significantly increased his fortune, having a substantial head start. Similar to me, he pursued relationships with women. Despite my concerns, Erin affirmed her belief that everything would be good and fun, considering that we were on the verge of trying for children. I recognized that this could be a potential time for Erin to stray, doubting her honesty. I reluctantly agreed to the trip, warning Erin that if she ended up with this guy, it would be irreversible. She acknowledged the warning, expressing her gladness about the decision. Deciding that this warning was my last, I saw it as a test of her worthiness as a wife. Temptation would reveal the truth, and time would be the judge. The following day, I accepted the invitation and made contingency plans with my friend. I also checked the island's cellular communication availability. It was there, still. As a precaution, I brought my satellite phone. The small plane from the national airport landed at a small airport, greeted by a man named Simon. He took us to the pier, where we boarded a boat with a comfortable cabin and a powerful engine, driven by another man, Charlie. After about 40 minutes, we docked at the island. Erin and I spent time exploring the ocean and other islands. Simon briefed us on our location and island activities. He was a friendly, muscular guy with a wonderful smile and laugh, larger than me. Approaching the north side pier with Erin leading the way, Simon commented that I didn't seem very happy with the trip and suggested calling me Don. I acknowledged having doubt, considering Simon's 6 years of working for Mr. G, expecting him to understand my reservations. When Simon inquired about why I came if I was so worried, I explained it was to see what happens. I also asked if he was Mr. G's bodyguard, to which Simon confirmed, mentioning his presence was just a precaution, although Mr. G was capable of handling himself. Curious about Simon's preparedness, I asked if he was armed. Simon mentioned having a knife but clarified that weapons were not allowed on the island. Expressing my distrust of the island's rules, I admitted to not being a very trusting person these days. Simon assured me that no firearms were needed, emphasizing that I wouldn't require one, no matter what happened. The boat pressed tightly against the pier, and Simon, along with a young man on the pier, secured it. Erin received Simon's hand, and I disembarked from the boat, noticing Simon's slight worry. Following Simon's direction, I accompanied Erin toward the substantial house. Upon our arrival, Mr. G greeted us, dressed casually in swimming trunks and a sleeveless shirt. Ella, considered the most beautiful woman in the world, accompanied him. I observed her, discovering who else would join us. It became apparent that she was Helen Johnson from Jonestown, the semi-official mistress on the island and in several houses owned by Mr. G. Though she was once seen in the company of other noblemen, it occurred less frequently now. Mr. G seemed to have secured an exclusive agreement, at least in some way. Mr. G extended his hand to shake, Ella hugged Aaron, and then Mr. G embraced both Aaron and Ella. She smelled delightful during the hug, and her lips touched my ear. We were escorted to a large room and offered drinks. Despite the one-afternoon timing and a light plain snack, a small buffet awaited us. Opting for sparkling water, I abstained from drinking, while Aaron chose wine. They both sampled a small selection from the buffet. During this, Mr. G inquired about the new book I had sent to Sally the previous week. Assuring him it was on schedule, Mr. G complimented my punctuality with a smile. Ella, having read all my books, expressed anticipation for the thriller involving rock climbing, flying small planes, and a love interest. She exclaimed, "Cannot wait. Maybe I can watch it sooner." Mr. G supported this idea, turned to Aaron and inquired about the music business. After Aaron's positive response, I humorously mentioned Marjorie's new book, predicting it would sell well. Marjorie, known as Marjorie Wright, wrote serious fiction but still sold a lot of books. Mr. G revealed Marjorie's rising sales and reminded me of my obligation for another book, to which I affirmed my ongoing work on a Christmas-themed mystery. L suggested moving on and proposed going for a swim. Mr. G promptly stood up, encouraging us to join him, and ran out the door. L mentioned that if we had swimsuits, she would show us to our room to change. The three of us stood up, and Ella led us into a large double bedroom, closing the door behind us. In the room, we changed into swimsuits. I opted for regular trunks, while Aaron chose a skimpy pink bikini. I expressed my opinion that the situation was excessive and questioned who Aaron was trying to impress. She responded that she just wanted to look good, mentioning Elle's beauty. I countered, telling her she was no less beautiful. Though she disliked my tone, Aaron refrained from responding. Upon descending, Ella wore an electric blue bikini, similar in size to Aaron's. I found both of them entirely enamoring. Exiting, we walked to the south side beach on a wooden path. Mr. G was already in the water, swimming behind the breakwaters. Aaron conveyed her reluctance to swim that far, a sentiment shared by Ella, who shuddered. Despite this, I dove into the surf, swam to where Mr. G was, using his crawl, and joined him. He was a proficient swimmer for his size, easily matched by my water-friendly body type. Sometimes changing strokes, we swam until he tired, and I followed him back to shore. As we approached, a large wave knocked him off his feet, and I picked him up. He spat out seawater and sand, and I held him tightly as we walked out. His legs seemed like wet noodles, likely from overextending himself in our swimming competition. Quickly regaining composure, he pulled away, stating that he was fine, and the wave had taken him by surprise. Approaching the sunbathing women, I inquired who wanted to swim. Ella immediately stood up, her top slipping slightly as she raised her hand. Both of us ran to the surf. Aaron declined, so I pursued Ella. The rear view was impressive. She dove in like an Olympian, swimming beyond the breakwaters. I followed her, amazed at her superior swimming compared to Mr. G's. Swimming alongside for a distance, she suggested, "Let's turn," which I did. Intrigued by the glimpse of flesh, I let her get about 4 meters ahead, observing her from the side. She turned over, floated on her back, and her chest swayed in and out of the water. An absolutely amazing woman. Given my proficiency in backstroke, I joined her, swimming alongside until she declared, "I've had enough," and swam back to the shore. Pausing briefly to glance at her from behind, upon surfacing from the waves, Aaron and Mr. G were nowhere in sight. But my attention shifted to my snug swimming trunks. She joked about me being Superman, and I chuckled, suggesting there was only one way to find out. Taking a step toward me, she halted, stating that we couldn't do this here, no matter how much she wanted it. With that, she turned and ran. On land, she couldn't match her speed in the water, allowing me to easily catch up, and we proceeded to the veranda. Hours were missing, leaving me to ponder if this had already transpired. Ella inquired about my profession, asking if I really wrote. Confirming, I explained how I aimed for believability in Rick's actions. Ella stared momentarily, diminishing my hardness, but as expected, it returned. She possessed a commanding presence. I firmly told Elle to back off, emphasizing my marital status and expressing a desire to keep it that way. I asked her as a favor not to pursue anything further. Elle laughed, labeling me a tongue-tied writer. I muttered, "Oh my God," and suggested checking on Aaron and Mr. G. I asked if it mattered to her, and she expressed interest, to which I replied, "Oh yeah, please." I then conveyed to Elle that I wanted her to understand I wouldn't be sleeping with her over the weekend. I explained that whatever Aaron decided to do, if they reached that point, I would leave. I acknowledged that I would likely long regret what I had just said, all while smiling. As Elle warned me that it wasn't easy to shake her off her tail. She entered the house. I waited a few minutes before following her. When I went upstairs to change clothes, I found no one. However, upon entering our room, I heard the shower running, which abruptly stopped as soon as it registered. No voices. Aaron opened the door, wrapped in a towel. She gasped upon seeing me and asked if Elle had already gotten to me. I assured her that Elle hadn't and explained that I wasn't going with her. I expressed hope that Aaron wouldn't go with Mr. G either, reminding her that we had discussed the situation earlier. I inquired about what they had been doing while Elle and I were swimming. Aaron informed me that Mr. G showed her around, pointing out the swimming pool, tennis court, and gym downstairs. She emphasized that there was no relationship activity involved. I acknowledged my belief that Mr. G wouldn't engage in such risky behavior, considering they didn't know how long Ella and I would be gone. And I suspected they had been watching us during our swim. Aaron concurred, describing Mr. G as a gentleman. However, she expressed concern that sooner or later he would come for me. I admitted to the likelihood and added that Elle would come for her as well. Aaron grinned, saying it wasn't very comforting, but assured me that she wouldn't give in, emphasizing that I shouldn't either. We discussed our plans for the evening, with Aaron declaring that we had time for love after drinks and snacks at 5. She dropped the towel, and I admitted I was still on edge because of Elle. We engaged privately with genuine zeal, only realizing afterward that the windows were open. Aaron remarked that it didn't matter, stating that they were married. Glancing out the window, Ella sat on a sun lounger about 6 meters away. She looked up, smiled, waved her hand, and then reached for her shorts. I distanced myself from the window. Aaron noticed my renewed arousal and fixed her gaze on me. Glancing out the window, she remained entranced for a while. A groan emanated from outside. Aaron turned to me exclaiming, "Oh my God, Donnie, forget about yourself. She can have me. I can give up on you. I will not give up." Aaron teased that I had to beg Elle to give up, claiming it was the only chance I had. I mentioned that I had already tried begging, but it didn't seem to work. I speculated that Plato had given Ella a task so he could have me, finding the situation strange but admitting it kept my interest. I promised Aaron that I wouldn't give in to Ella's advances, expressing gratitude for her help. Aaron observed that I was still erect and suggested that we could engage privately every 2 hours to alleviate the situation. We descended to the main room in casual attire, Docker shorts and a collared shirt for me, and Aaron in a dress with her hair down and high-heeled sandals. Mr. G was already there, sipping beer. He inquired about our swim with Ella, and I responded positively, praising Ella's swimming talents. Mr. G suggested I call him Plato, appreciating the famous name. He mentioned his father's fondness for reading about Plato. Ella joined us, also wearing a dress and heels. The dress seemed modest, but looked anything but on her. I sensed Aaron feeling a bit insecure, understanding it was part of the game, Ella attempting to outshine Aaron, who in turn would try to assert herself by winning Plato's attention. I moved closer to Aaron, putting my arm around her shoulders. Plato informed us about the available beverages and snacks, expressing a preference for pretzels. As he spoke, he ate one. The 4 of us chatted for a while, and then Ella took me to show me around the house, which I found impressive. I asked if Plato used the gym, and Ella confirmed, mentioning his preference for weightlifting. She pointed to the bench with a barbell and described it as heavy. I demonstrated a few swings with the barbell, with Ella watching intently from above. Ella mentioned that Plato only did 3 reps before resting, and as she spoke, she began breathing heavily. I decided to lift the barbell and did 8 more reps. Plato then commented on Ella's strengths, suggesting that her role for the weekend should be to seduce me so Plato could take care of Aaron. Ella acknowledged that similar tasks had occurred before, expressing her willingness to finish the job, even if it wasn't usually very pleasant. She playfully asked if I would stop if she started begging. I was genuinely serious in my response, but she perceived it as a joke, stating that she wouldn't stop but would enjoy seeing me beg. Ella then ascended the stairs, and I waited for my hardness to subside before standing up. The 3 of them huddled together in the living room and conversed. When I entered, they fell silent, and Plato suggested I have something to drink, maybe beer. I glanced at the bar, walked over, extracted a bottle of Corona, and popped it open. The others had wine, and we chatted for a bit. I then asked if they had finished discussing their plot or if I should leave, prompting an awkward silence. Ella glanced at the others, mainly Aaron, who looked at Plato. Plato then stated that there were no secrets. At that moment, Simon came in and declared that dinner was served, leading us into the dining room, where dishes were arranged on the buffet table. It was a familial serving style. We sat at one end of a large table. They poured water, but I opted for my beer and refrained from water. Breaking the conversation, Plato addressed the tense situation I had created, and we engaged in friendly discussions about politics and baseball. Plato was a Yankees fan. Aaron and I rooted for the Orioles and Nationals. Ella liked the Pirates, being from Jonestown. Simon served dessert, tiramisu. I skipped mine. Plato seemed to notice. Aaron insisted that Plato not skip dessert, encouraging him to eat. Plato commented on keeping his waist in check and mentioned Aaron having no fat in her body, claiming to have observed her while swimming and noting her preference for beer over water. In response to Aaron expressing a lack of trust, Plato dismissed the idea of being medicated with something forbidden, considering it crazy. He encouraged me to eat and drink while pushing a glass of water and tiramisu toward me. I smiled and offered the same to Plato. However, he sat with a stony face and instructed Simon to clear the table. Simon noticed the change in the water and dessert arrangement, picked up my untouched glass of water and tiramisu, and carried them away. Ella suggested moving to the courtyard for music and dancing. Aaron and Plato remained silent. I stood up and extended my hand to Ella, leading her to the patio. Once there, she remarked on my apparent suspicion of Plato slipping something into the food and water. I acknowledged the possibility but noted that Plato hadn't taken either himself and had them. Removed by Simon, the others joined us, and soft music started playing. I approached Aaron, took her by the elbow, and led her away from Plato into the open area. We danced, and although Aaron was initially shy, she eventually relaxed, pressing herself close to me. She whispered, "I love you, Donnie, always." "I love you too, Aaron." We continued dancing. The music concluded, and we joined Plato and Ella at a table. Soon the music resumed, and Ella rose, offering her hand to me. She led me to the dance floor. We danced. Ella might have been the world's most captivating distraction. With her sweet, subtle fragrance and the contours of her body, she entranced me, eliciting immediate delight, as she always did. Observing Plato's hands on Aaron's backside, I noted that she didn't push them away. Breaking away from Ella, I walked the short distance to Aaron and Plato, standing there and observing them. Aaron noticed and tried to move away from Plato, who persisted in keeping his hands on her. She gently pushed him on the chest, expressing a desire to avoid problems. Plato released her but took her hand, guiding her back to the table. Ella returned after me, and we sat down, with her sitting very close to me. Aaron held Plato's hand as they sat side by side. Plato expressed disappointment in me, claiming that Ella was a fantastic lover and could provide me with one of the most powerful and delightful experiences of my life. He accused me of denying her this opportunity. I asserted that I had a wife and wouldn't entertain the idea of a trade, bringing us back to the initial discussion. Turning to Aaron, I stated that it was either him or me, with no intermediary options. She withdrew her hand from his but looked at me and suggested that it was only for the weekend, and on Monday, everything would be back to normal. She asked if I couldn't have some fun with Ella for the time being. Scrutinizing her, I questioned if she was serious, and if I should take it as a yes or no, even if it meant it would be over between us. I firmly stated my refusal with a simple no. Despite not understanding why it should imply anything, I made it clear that I wouldn't entertain the idea. I extended my hand to her, and she took it. Pulling her toward me, I gave her the hottest kiss I could muster, running my hands up and down her body. Afterward, I pulled away, tears welling up in my eyes. I exhaled the words that nearly crushed me, stating, "The mere thought that you would agree to be with this guy means it's all over between us. It's done." I turned and headed for the stairs. She cried out, "No, Donnie, no." I reached the top of the stairs, grabbed my previously packed bag, and left through the back fire escape. I made the call and ran into the darkness, sobbing while running. I still heard her screams. About 20 minutes later, I heard a plane. It landed near the southern dock, and my friend Todd Jacob swam up to me. Approaching him with Plato and Simon emerging behind me, Plato exclaimed that there was no escape and suggested I stay to calm my wife down. Charging at me, he reached the pier. Plato, uncontrollable and unfit for a fight, splashed around in the water, shouting about firing me. Boarding the plane with Todd at the controls, we flew to a small lake near Dulles. A car was waiting for me there, and I paid Todd for the service. Heading home to Alexandria, the road was dark and desolate. Our house, too, was dimly lit. Upon entering, I surveyed the surroundings, photos of us in happier times, pictures of our relatives. Shocked, I sat in a chair gazing into space, and that's how I drifted off to sleep. At 8 in the morning, a car sound outside woke me up. I peered out and saw Erin stepping out of a rental car. She carried her bag to the door, unlocked it, and went inside. I stood and observed her. She stood motionless, gazing at me. She looked awful, probably no better than me. She expressed that in her entire life, she had never messed up like that, and vowed never to do it again, not wanting to lose me. I sighed in response. I confronted Erin, asking her what she thought would happen when she decided to let Plato use her. I questioned if she thought I wouldn't notice because of Ella. She admitted to being stupid and not anticipating the consequences. I inquired if Erin and Plato had set everything up, and she looked down, confessing that Plato suggested there might be a substitution when they got there. She foresaw it in advance, thinking she would say no, but I surprised her by agreeing with the condition that I go with Ella. She mentioned how much I seemed to desire Ella, and that the whole experience was intended as a sideshow to rekindle our marriage. I smiled in response. I questioned Erin about why she thought Plato would be better than me. She explained that he excited her, being older and stronger, and suggested that he knew what to do to win her over. She clarified that she never thought he would be better than me, just different. Concerned about the future, I asked how I could be sure this wouldn't happen again, considering there are many guys like Plato in the world. And he's still around. Erin insisted that she didn't mean to cheat, and believed everything was right in front of me. She thought I would agree now since I had turned down Ella. Expressing my disappointment, I remarked that she wasn't the woman I met and married, emphasizing that the woman I knew wouldn't succumb to the advances of another guy. Erin pleaded to see what happens next and suggested we continue enjoying great lovemaking, while acknowledging that we both missed it. She stood up and removed all her clothes, prompting me to think about turning away, but ultimately not doing so. She led me upstairs. The only constant in our relationship, always present and likely to remain, is our complete sexual compatibility. I let her go. Home, and 10 years later, I picked up our kids from the school bus, Jessica, who is 8, and Robert, who is 6. Helen, who is 3 and doesn't attend school yet, stayed with me. As a stay-at-home writer, I had help and the opportunity to write. It took over a year before I trusted Erin enough to let her stop taking the pills, and when she did, our love-making life flourished. The idea of her getting pregnant excited us greatly. I closed my contract with the previous publisher, and Sally and I moved on to something else. The first book I wrote was about adventures on an island closely mirroring reality. It sold a considerable number of copies, securing a movie deal that included my 3 previous books. Plato couldn't complain about half-truths in the book, where he was cast as Socrates and met a fitting fate. Erin now owns 2 stores that generate some income, while I earn substantially. Before fully accepting her back, Erin signed a post-nuptial agreement ensuring fidelity from both of us. With the school year underway, as I drove the 2 older kids home, a small red sports car arrived at our entrance. A remarkable pair of legs emerged, followed by the most beautiful woman in the world, Ella. The children excitedly ran up to her, shouting, "Aunt Ella!" She hugged them and fussed around. While young Helen welcomed her at the door, I poured her favorite drink, seltzer, and informed her that Erin would arrive soon. I mentioned preparing a high-calorie salad, concluding with, "But that's a completely different story. I'm Donald, aged 56, sharing my life for the first time. I'm married to Lauren, aged 45, and we have a 13-year-old daughter." This recount is from a few months ago. My wife, our daughter, and I were in Istanbul with a large group of 3 families, totaling around 16 people. As our trip concluded, we gathered at Istanbul Airport for our collective return to Chicago. With an 11-hour flight ahead, we conducted a group accounting session. Unexpectedly, our flight faced a 6-hour delay. Utilizing the time, we all headed to the lounge, finding it surprisingly empty. We were the sole occupants, engaging in lively conversations, sharing smiles, and reliving tales of Turkey and its delectable cuisine. Taking a brief smoke break, I returned after 15 minutes, walking towards my wife, spotting a slender figure near her. My heart raced, not due to nicotine, but an intense surge of emotions. The closer I got, the more my heart raced, transporting me back 2 decades to a moment of holding hands in a church, saying "I do," and embarking on a shared life. Suddenly, I snapped back to the lounge, informing my wife of my need for fresh air before walking out without acknowledging the woman talking to her. Outside, memories flooded back, bringing me to moments with Maria in Columbus, Georgia, by the Chattahoochee River. Closing my eyes, I revisited our love story, from college to marriage. Maria, my life, has been the object of my affection since our college days. We married, moved in together, and embarked on a promising married life. My journalism career and her role as a financial expert led to frequent travels, yet we maintained our connection. Maria's sparkling eyes brightened my days, and when at home, our time was filled with love and delicious meals she prepared. The initial 2 years of marriage were seamless, with no signs of trouble in paradise. We postponed having children to establish ourselves professionally. Our only challenge was the limited time we could spend together due to our demanding jobs. Travel became a constant, even for Maria. The sole point of contention was my mother, living alone and desiring frequent visits. My wife harbored a dislike for her, and although I never probed the reasons, I endeavored to keep them apart, maintaining a delicate balance between them. In January, my mother became ill, and I informed my wife that I would care for her. She wasn't pleased, since I had just returned from covering a story in Iraq. We argued because she wanted me to hire help for my mother instead of going myself. I explained that my mother was old, and this might be the last time I saw her alive. Maria was unhappy, but I ignored it. 3 days later, my mother died in my arms, leaving me devastated. After her burial, I returned home, and Maria once again complained about my mother. I was shocked and couldn't understand her point. She caused so much trouble, insisting that the deceased person should have been in the hospital from the start. I remained silent, trying to comprehend it all. "Why is Maria criticizing a deceased person?" I retorted, but she shut me down, saying the person wouldn't respond, so I should zip it. That led to a week of silence between us. To break the ice, I took her out for dinner, and that night we shared in closeness. For a moment, things seemed better, but I had to go to Afghanistan to cover the historic Silk Road. In my absence, Maria earned promotions and a higher salary. When I returned 2 weeks later, everything had changed. Coming home, Maria greeted me warmly, but during dinner, she seemed tense. She said we needed changes in our lives. "What changes do you want?" I asked. She expressed the challenges of my frequent and prolonged absences, longing for my touch. Maria gave me 2 options: find a job near her, or find her job to travel with me. Torn but relieved by her honesty, I agreed to find another job, closing the topic. The next morning, I resigned and got a local job at the TV channel, even though it paid less. When I told Maria about the 30% reduction in my salary, she was angry. I explained the trade-off for a stationary job, but she resisted, upset about the decreased contribution and its impact on her lifestyle. It was a tough situation, but I was committed to making it work. We continued like that, and over the next 3 months, things deteriorated. We talked less, and nights lacked lovemaking. Her demeanor shifted from a loving wife to a nagging presence. She found faults in everything, and not a single day passed without going to bed angry. It got so bad that one night she asked me to stop breathing because my breath disturbed her sleep. A few days later, my phone went missing, prompting me to use my wife's phone to call mine. Surprisingly, her phone was locked, which was unusual since I never had a lock on mine and she never did either, as far as I knew. This raised suspicions about why her phone had a lock. Was she hiding something? On a Thursday night, she returned from a late-night party with her office friends, appearing disheveled in a black dress with no lipstick. When I asked what happened, she explained she danced too much and was tired. Helping her to the bedroom, I noticed a bruise on her left thigh, and she wasn't wearing panties, which was out of character for her. Unable to sleep that night, I became determined to uncover the truth. As a journalist, my instinct was to investigate. Although I knew many people who could assist, I preferred handling it on my own. 3 weeks later, I found myself outside Motel 6 on Victory Drive at 2:30 p.m., having tracked Maria's car there. Approaching room 12, I unlocked the door and discovered a monitor displaying my wife in a compromising position with her blonde lover Steve Bowman, an old college foe who'd always admired Maria. My tears had ceased, leaving me emotionally numb. The pain in my heart was overwhelming after 3 weeks of relentless investigation. Breaking the door and acting impulsively crossed my mind, but I had promised the motel manager no violence, a condition for his assistance in setting up recording devices in the room. Despite the manager's restriction, violence remained an option. Outside the motel, I left with a smile, got into my car, and parked behind Steve's Mustang. Armed with an ice pick, I punctured all 4 tires, patiently waiting for what would unfold next. After an hour, Steve emerged, holding Maria by her exposed waist, an image I captured on camera. I returned my camera to its place and stepped out of my truck, approaching them directly. Maria remained silent, appearing as if she had seen a ghost, while Steve wore a sinister grin, reveling in taking another man's wife. Keeping his grip on her waist, I observed Maria's feeble attempt to free herself. Upon noticing me, she greeted and questioned my unexpected presence. I stared back, not uttering a word. In an effort to explain, she insisted that she could clarify, emphasizing that it wasn't what I might be thinking. In response to her explanation, my retort came with my gaze fixed on Steve's hand on her waist, stating that I was not thinking, just observing. With a smile, I made a remark suggesting that Steve might have taken away my wife. Maria denied any wrongdoing, explaining that their interaction was part of a meeting they had at that location. My response was cynical, pointing out that the meeting seemed to involve unconventional activities. I asked if Steve had satisfied her, prompting a gasp from Maria as she recalled her recent words. A warning followed, stating that all her actions were on video and would be sent to her office, reaching friends, family, Linda, and her dad. Steve interjected, shouting a plea to leave Linda out of the situation. Dismissing his request, I added that Linda had every right to be involved since her husband was involved with my wife, creating a lot of unfinished business. Maintaining a smile, I continued, mentioning that Linda had already witnessed their actions and was eagerly awaiting the video copy to file for divorce. I suggested that in their situation, preparing to say goodbye to their beloved Mustang might be wise, as it would be sold to settle the lawsuit. Furious, Steve lunged at me, a big mistake considering my years of travel to places like Iraq and Afghanistan. I had been among warriors and fighters, learning a few tricks along the way. Blocking his right hand, ducking forward, I landed a left on his chin, causing him to drop like a bag of potatoes. He struggled to get up, wobbling towards me, only to receive an uppercut that left him unconscious. Maria stood there, horrified, and I instructed her to get in the truck. We didn't go home. Instead, we headed straight to my lawyer. Ignoring Maria's inquiries, I gestured for her silence. In the lawyer's office, we were directed to the large conference room and took seats on opposite sides of the table. The atmosphere was tense until Ron Freeman, my lawyer, entered and handed an envelope to Maria. He explained the terms, stating that the divorce had been filed based on irreconcilable differences. There was no shared property, and the legal transfer of his mother's house hadn't occurred, so she couldn't claim it. He informed her that she would receive half the money from the joint account, which she could withdraw. Since she earned more, there was no alimony. Ron concluded the discussion and left the room. Maria clutched the envelope and directed her gaze at me. Breaking the silence, I warned her that if she contested the divorce, I'd alter the grounds to infidelity, ensuring widespread exposure of her actions on all social media platforms. I threatened to send the evidence to her office, leading to termination, and vowed to follow her if she fled to another city, making her life a perpetual fear of tarnished reputation. After she nodded in understanding, I stood up and left. Maria, however, spoke up, questioning if I wanted to know why she acted as she did. She explained that I desired a lifestyle she couldn't provide, seeking luxury without understanding the sacrifices. According to her, the blonde lover fulfilled those desires temporarily, but he was already married and merely seeking cheap entertainment. Maria questioned how long such happiness would last, anticipating a cycle of seeking new lovers. She concluded by pointing out my present situation, with only an envelope in hand. Her parting words wished me a nice day. Months later, I encountered her in court during the divorce proceedings. We never exchanged words, only receiving the court's orders granting the divorce. Steve, her lover, never filed a complaint against me, as cameras in the parking lot would have shown him as the aggressor. I sent Linda the videos and evidence of Steve's infidelity leading to their divorce, and rumors surfaced of Steve facing consequences from Linda's brothers. Linda's father, connected and vengeful, wanted to punish Maria, but Linda intervened. I changed jobs and eventually returned to my old position in a different city. Life moved forward. At Istanbul Airport, I found myself a chief journalist with ample wealth, a faithful wife, and a wonderful daughter. Back in the airport lounge, my wife continued conversing with Maria for hours. Staying away, I observed their interaction, concerned about Maria's intentions. Later, I confirmed our departure time with airport officials. Boarding the flight after a challenging wait, I sat beside my wife, who displayed a different smile. Curious, I inquired about her discussion with Maria. She revealed that she was expressing gratitude to Maria for her mistakes, which led her to find me. Surprised, I asked if Maria had disclosed this information. My wife clarified that Maria never mentioned me, but shared court orders and investigative materials found in the attic. When I asked about their conversation, my wife downplayed it, stating she listened to Maria's regrets about missing her ex-husband and her desire for a life like mine. I smiled, closed my eyes, and settled back into my chair. My cheating wife's secret plan for an open marriage on our anniversary led to heartbreak and divorce. My 29-year-old wife, who was beautiful, expressed her desire to pursue relationships outside of our marriage in clear terms, making it easy for me to understand. To set the stage, I had arranged a fancy dinner at one of our beloved upscale restaurants. I ensured everything was impeccable, from the elegant white tablecloths to the impressive wine selection. I even splurged on a diamond necklace she had been eyeing, spending close to $1,000. Little did I know I would soon need to recoup that expense. Throughout dinner, I sensed her unease. Our usual laid-back conversations carried an undercurrent of tension. She appeared preoccupied, scanning the room as if in search of something or someone. Normally, her gaze met mine steadily, but now it wandered aimlessly. Eventually, after we completed the main course and indulged in more wine, she broached the topic weighing on her mind. "Honey, there's something I've been keeping for a while, and I believe it's time to address it." I paused, delicately placing my wine glass on the table. What could she possibly be referring to? Her demeanor had shifted, adopting a seriousness indicative of an impending discussion. I pondered potential topics. Was she hinting at wanting to start a family? We had discussed it previously, agreeing to wait until we were more established in our careers and finances. Now that we had reached those milestones, I was eager about the prospect. However, her avoidance of eye contact hinted that it might be something else entirely. Typically, when discussing starting a family, there's radiant joy and unbreakable focus on each other. But that evening, something felt off. "Honey, we need to have a serious conversation," Andrea began, her expression grave, signaling this was no ordinary talk. "I've been doing a lot of soul-searching, and this means a great deal to me," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to explore my identity beyond our relationship. I believe it'll ultimately make me a better partner for you in the long haul." I was taken aback, my thoughts whirling. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I inquired, striving to maintain composure in my tone. Leaning forward, I attempted to meet her gaze, but she avoided it. "I want to pursue relationships with other people, Rob. I hope we can accept this to prevent future pain," she confessed. That revelation struck me like a sledgehammer. My heart raced, heat flooding my face. "What exactly do you mean by other people?" I demanded, needing clarification. My voice grew louder, a blend of disbelief and frustration seeping through. "Are you talking about seeing other men?" She hesitated, nibbling her lip. "Yes, that's part of it," she admitted at last. The room seemed to spin around me. "You're saying you want to date other men and you expect me to be okay with it?" I couldn't contain the surge of frustration. "Andrea, how could you possibly think this is acceptable?" She reached out across the table, aiming for my hand, but I recoiled. "I still love you, Rob, that hasn't changed. I just need to delve into this aspect of myself. It's something I must do." Her words felt like a betrayal, and despite her attempts at a calm explanation, I couldn't grasp it. Sitting there, with the restaurant's buzz fading into the background, I realized our lives might never be the same. "What in the world are you saying, Andrea?" Shock seeped into my voice. "You want to have an affair and you expect me to simply agree while you go off with other men?" Good grief! My words were louder than intended, drawing the stares of fellow diners. "Lower your voice, honey," Andrea hissed. "We don't need everyone eavesdropping." It dawned on me then, she had chosen this busy restaurant deliberately, assuming I wouldn't create a scene in public. She had blindsided me, and I felt completely disoriented. My stomach churned, a sickly feeling rising, threatening to undo our entire meal. The only question I could muster was, "Why, Andrea? Why other men?" I pushed for clarification. "What does exploring yourself even entail? Are you implying you want to be physically engaged with other men? Are you leaving me?" She gazed at me, her eyes gentle yet resolute. "No, Rob, I'm not abandoning you. There are numerous reasons why I believe I must do this. Please trust me when I say I love you profoundly. You're my soulmate. I envision a future with us aging together and starting a family. However, presently there are aspects of myself I'm lacking, aspects I need to uncover. I'm asking you just for a brief period to allow me to explore this. Afterward, I'll be fully devoted to you again. I swear." Her words were intended to provide comfort, yet they lingered between us, laden with uncertainty. Could I truly embrace this? Could our marriage endure it? The notion plagued me as I sat there, attempting to process her request. This had to be the ultimate betrayal. During our 5th anniversary dinner, my wife blindsided me by expressing her desire to see other men. She expected me to acquiesce as if nothing were amiss, assuring me that afterward, everything would return to normal, as though nothing had transpired. She even asserted it would enhance her role as a wife. I was speechless. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, and I struggled to breathe, feeling as though I were trapped in a surreal nightmare. I rose from my seat, neatly placed my napkin on the table, and downed my wine in one gulp. Without a word, I set the glass down, turned on my heel, and exited. "Honey, where are you going?" she called after me. "I'm not sure," I replied without looking back, "but you should probably take a cab home." I made my way out of the restaurant, found my car, and simply drove. I had no destination in mind. I just needed to escape. My head throbbed, the pain radiating from the base of my skull, making it difficult to focus on anything else. I drove aimlessly, engulfed in the hum of the engine and the blur of passing streetlights. Time and place became inconsequential. The following morning, I awoke in my car, my head still throbbing and the surroundings unfamiliar. Stepping out, I stretched, surveying the area, hoping last night was merely a nightmare. Priority 1, I urgently needed a restroom break and a sizable cup of coffee. But before heading home, I required a plan. After attending to nature's call behind a nearby bush, I returned to the car, started the engine, and set off in search of that essential coffee. Discovering a quaint diner, I ordered breakfast alongside my coffee, settling in to contemplate my options. Allowing my wife to pursue relationships with other men was out of the question. It would undoubtedly spell the demise of our marriage, despite her assertions from the previous night. I couldn't shake the suspicion that she wasn't the woman I thought I had married. Perhaps she was undergoing some sort of crisis, conjuring up ideas utterly detached from reality. I'm no psychiatrist, just a bewildered guy. I powered up my phone, which I had switched off during the night, revealing numerous texts and missed calls from Andrea. She expressed concern about my whereabouts and well-being. At that moment, I didn't feel ready to return home or engage in conversation with her, but I knew avoidance wasn't a solution. Hence, I opted not to respond to her messages just yet. After downing multiple cups of coffee and enjoying a hearty breakfast of eggs and bacon, I outlined a basic plan for my next steps. It was time to confront the issue awaiting me at home. Upon pulling into the driveway, Andrea rushed out, her face etched with worry. "Honey, where were you all night? I was terrified, fearing you might have been in an accident or worse," she exclaimed, leaning in for a kiss. Stepping back, I stated firmly, "Andrea, I need to freshen up first, then we need to sit down and thoroughly discuss this self-exploration notion you brought up last night." With that, I strode past her, making a beeline for the bedroom to shed the suit I had worn throughout the night. I indulged in a lengthy, steamy shower, using the time to rehearse my forthcoming words. Doubts plagued my mind. I had to discern if I still had a wife, or if this signaled her farewell. Perhaps it was a test of my commitment. Trying to decipher her thoughts drove me to the brink. Undoubtedly, I loved her. We exchanged vows, didn't we? Our grand wedding and European honeymoon were a testament to that. The notion of being with another woman hadn't even crossed my mind. I was fully invested. But now, it seemed she wasn't on the same page. Fortunately, our lack of children simplified matters. Whether that would change depended entirely on the unfolding days and weeks. After donning fresh attire, I ventured into the kitchen to brew another cup of coffee. Grabbing a notepad and pen, I noticed Andrea seated at the kitchen island, her gaze fixed on me. I attempted to maintain composure, though turmoil churned within. Coffee in hand, I settled opposite her. I initiated, "So, Andrea, could you please reiterate why you wish to explore relationships outside our marriage?" Andrea met my gaze squarely. "Honey, I need to seek validation as a woman. Currently, I feel my needs aren't being met. I want to identify and address those needs independently." "So, you're unsure of your needs and aim to discover them," I summarized, striving for a steady tone. "Additionally, are you proposing a temporary withdrawal from our relationship to pursue your quest?" "No, honey, I won't depart. I'll remain here in our home with you," Andrea responded promptly. "However, I require the autonomy to structure my own schedule and proceed at my own pace." "When do you envision commencing this exploration and adapting your new routine?" I asked. "Well, I guess any time would suffice," she responded, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Do you support my decision?" "No, I don't support any of this, Andrea," I stated firmly. "When we exchanged vows, we pledged to be lifelong partners and lovers, and now you want to pursue other romantic connections. What am I supposed to make of this? It feels like you're disengaging from our marriage." "Honey, it's not as simple as that," Andrea rebutted, her frustration evident. "I'm seeking a connection that's been absent for a couple of years now. Our lives have become consumed by work. I don't feel valued by you as I did in the early days of our marriage." "Valued? Good Lord, everything I do for us," I countered, feeling my anger simmer. "I've toiled tirelessly to provide for our future, the one we envisioned when we tied the knot. We're on the brink of paying off this house, for crying out loud." I knew I needed to address the most pressing issue. "Are you intending to engage in relationships with other men?" I inquired, attempting to maintain a steady tone. "Honey, I can't say definitively what I'll do. If it feels right with the right person, I might entertain the idea," she responded, avoiding my gaze. "So you're contemplating infidelity then?" I pressed, unable to conceal my disbelief. "It's not infidelity, Rob. It's not cheating if it's done with your knowledge," she replied calmly. My blood pressure skyrocketed. Taking a deep breath, I sipped my coffee, wishing it were something stronger. I needed to remain composed to navigate this conversation effectively. "Let me clarify, Andrea," I said, endeavoring to grasp the situation. "You plan to meet other men, go out with them, and possibly become physically engaged, yet you'll still reside here with me. Is that accurate?" "Honey, it's not quite that simple. I'm still uncertain," Andrea responded, her tone wavering. "It seems pretty clear-cut to me," I countered. "What about our relationship? Are we expected to pause our marriage? Do you anticipate us remaining physically engaged while you explore this?" "Absolutely. We're a family, you and I. I love you deeply, and I want us to remain a family. This is just something I feel compelled to do for myself," she explained, her eyes pleading for comprehension. "And how frequently do you envision doing this, Andrea? Every weekend? Multiple times a week? Every night? How far do you plan to take this exploration?" I pressed. "I haven't decided yet," she responded, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Honey, why are you so fixated on the specifics?" Andrea asked, her frustration evident. "Well, I need to understand what my life will entail while you're out meeting, dating, and being with other partners." "I don't have a girlfriend, Andrea, not yet at least," I remarked, the bitterness slipping into my tone unintentionally. Taking a deep breath, I struggled to contain my anger. "Andrea, I need some clarity before we conclude today. Have you genuinely committed to this decision? Have you considered the impact on our marriage?" Andrea nodded but evaded a direct response. It seemed she hadn't fully considered my perspective or opinions. Then she uttered the sentence that would define our future. "If you love me, you'll allow me to do this." I replied firmly, "If you love me, Andrea, you won't proceed with this. This is my ultimatum. Infidelity, even with forewarning, is a deal-breaker in our marriage. Now my terms needed to be established. Here are my conditions, non-negotiable. If you choose to pursue relationships with other men, you must vacate the premises. I won't share a home with you while you're dating and being physically engaged with others. Bringing them here is out of the question. You need to find alternative accommodation." "Honey, where am I supposed to go?" she asked. "Perhaps you can stay with one of your friends, like Jessica from school. You've spent time with her. She's divorced and lives alone, right? Ask if you can stay with her for a while. If that's not feasible, you can rent a short-term apartment. You'll be responsible for all expenses, utilities, and your car payments." Andrea worked as a third-grade teacher at an elementary school, earning a substantial salary. Meanwhile, I served as a forensic auditing specialist for a prominent firm, enjoying a good income along with yearly bonuses. Based on her remarks, it seemed I wasn't fulfilling all her needs within our relationship. Andrea appeared to perceive my newfound willingness to compromise as a victory. She made eye contact, presuming she had gained the upper hand. Continuing, I stated, "So if you're considering an open marriage, I suppose I'll need to exercise patience while you pursue extramarital relationships. Will you eventually return to our home?" "Honey, absolutely. I cherish you deeply, you're my husband, and I envision building a family with you." I countered, "What am I supposed to do while you're involved in physically engaged relationships with other men? Do you expect me to remain faithful? Should I await your return with open arms and love after you've finished with your boyfriends? Have you considered the impact on me at all? I want you as my husband, honey, and only you. Regardless of my actions while I'm away, my feelings for you won't change. Upon my return, I want you to be my husband and the father of our children," she declared. I couldn't help but find this declaration of love peculiar. Despite acknowledging my refusal to allow her boyfriends into our home, she seemed to view it as a triumph. She could engage with other men without concern for my intervention. "Very well. You need to arrange your accommodations and inform me by the end of the week. However, we have some matters to address here and now. I need you to relocate your clothes and belongings to the spare bedroom. I'm unsure if I can share the same bed with you currently. Your plan is too distressing, and I feel as though you're leaving me, even if it's not explicitly stated. So, Andrea, what am I to make of all this?" Andrea stayed silent, perhaps beginning to realize that I wouldn't simply accept her proposal without question. She might have been surprised by my request for her to vacate our bed, but what did she truly anticipate? Did she believe I was a pushover, willing to passively allow her to pursue affairs, then return home to maintain the facade of a happy marriage, eventually having children and carrying on as if nothing had occurred? Not a chance. Andrea happened to be acquainted with another teacher, Jessica, and I suspected that some of these misguided notions might be stemming from her. Jessica, a divorced fourth-grade teacher at the same school as my wife, was embroiled in a scandal 2 years ago for cheating on her husband with multiple partners, resulting in her expulsion. At 35 years old, Jessica possessed an attractive appearance and an appealing physique. However, she had tended to engage in physically engaged relations with any man who showed her attention. I strongly suspected that Jessica was influencing Andrea's desire to explore before starting a family. For me, the reality was straightforward. If Andrea ventured too far, there wouldn't be a family, at least not with me. All that would remain was a divorce. I stood up from the table and began to walk away. Andrea, is that all? Are you asking me to leave? Yeah, for now. Let me be clear, Andrea. I don't want you to proceed with any of this. We vowed to be faithful when we got married, and now you're planning to break that vow. So what exactly do you expect me to do? Do you think I'll just stand by while you pursue relationships with other men? If you want an open marriage, then I suppose I'll have the same option. Andrea was left speechless, and I left before our conversation escalated into a confrontation. Grabbing my car keys, I exited the house. Honey, where are you going? She called after me. I'm not sure right now, but remember to move your things to the spare room and start looking for a place to stay. Just remember, you won't be engaging in affairs until you've left, I replied as I left, intentionally closing the door louder than usual. While I briefly considered driving to Jessica's apartment and confronting her, I knew I needed to set aside my anger and frustration for the time being. It was Andrea who had instigated this situation, and she could handle the inconvenience it brought. Plus, I suspected Jessica would be willing to accommodate Andrea, and I had to resist the urge to confront her physically. Monday morning found me up and out of my office before Andrea even stirred. With her intentions in mind, I had a substantial amount of work to do on my strategy. I had no intention of tolerating her infidelity. It stung that she believed she could engage in extramarital affairs, assuming I'd foolishly stand by, allow her to do so, and then pretend everything was fine upon her return. What if she returned with an STD, or worse, pregnant? Absolutely not, I wouldn't stand for it. Step 1 was contacting my attorney. Fortunately, my attorney happened to be a friend well-versed in various legal matters, from real estate to wills. While I didn't anticipate him handling the divorce directly, he could offer a recommendation. He did just that, referring me to a skilled divorce attorney from his firm. I had a meeting arranged with her later that same afternoon. It would be a difficult discussion, but my new attorney was a seasoned litigator, familiar with our state's laws. I aimed to keep this as amicable as possible. In fact, I was content with a fair 50-50th split of our assets. Neither of us had much when we married, and we had both worked diligently to build a comfortable life together, until now. So I was prepared to divide things evenly. I wasn't entirely devoid of compassion, and squabbling over assets would only prolong the divorce proceedings. The assets weren't worth retaining if it meant dealing with a cheating wife. The necessary paperwork would be prepared and held until I had evidence of my wife's infidelity. Until then, this was merely an initial step on my part. The week seemed interminable. I made a point of spending as little time at home as possible, venturing out every evening, mostly to the gym to alleviate stress. I observed Andrea spending considerable time with Jessica. By Thursday, she informed me that she would be staying with Jessica for a couple of weeks until finding a more suitable place. I knew it would be a convenient arrangement for her to be with her boyfriends without any interference from me. It appeared Jessica might be entertaining her own suitors concurrently, turning the situation into quite a mess. This whole situation was simply a colossal mess. On Saturday, merely a week after commemorating our 5th wedding anniversary, my wife's decision to pursue extramarital affairs became evident as she packed her belongings into her car, preparing to depart. However, she paused just before leaving. "Honey, I don't want to go. Are you absolutely certain we can't find a way to resolve things so I can stay?" she implored. "I love you deeply, and I genuinely want to enhance our marriage." Feeling exasperated, I replied, "Andrea, if you truly loved me and desired to improve our marriage, you wouldn't proceed with this. I do want you to remain here with me, but I cannot condone your closeness with other men while still being my wife. I love you, but I won't tolerate that. If you won't consider attending marriage counseling to address our issues, I'm unsure what else I can say. So, please go." While she loaded her belongings into her car, I drove to the hardware store in my own car to purchase new locks for the house. I replaced 3 locks and changed the security code for the garage door opener. Throughout Saturday night and all of Sunday, I remained at home, staring at the walls, hoping that Andrea would come to her senses and return. The subsequent week proved exceptionally challenging for me. I visited the gym daily and resumed running in an effort to alleviate my stress. At times, I found myself descending into deep depression, longing to approach Andrea and plead for her return. Intellectually, I still struggled to comprehend that my wife was leaving me to pursue extramarital affairs while we remained married. It made me feel like an utter failure. Was I genuinely so inadequate that my wife was willing to openly display her infidelity? Apparently, that was the case. I turned to the internet to delve into the psychology of infidelity and the reasons why spouses cheat. I was astonished to discover that approximately 40% of married individuals engage in infidelity. What was even more surprising was that nearly 90% of them opt to remain in their marriages. Frequently, infidelity is silently tolerated by the other spouse, particularly when children are involved, making it easier for them to accept the unfaithfulness and continue as if it weren't happening. Many cheating wives claim to still love their husbands and families but seek excitement outside the marriage, feeling something lacking at home. Many women who have affairs express that their households require significant effort. The daily routine of managing a family, juggling kids' activities, and handling mundane chores can make closeness with their husbands seem dull. They long for excitement with a lover who focuses solely on them, without immediately discussing children or errands after closeness. Perhaps the key to a successful marriage lies in treating one's wife as if she were having an affair, minus the divorce, simply enjoying the physical aspect. I pondered the idea of trying to pick up my wife at the club she and Jessica frequented. People have affairs for various reasons: a lack of carnal satisfaction in the relationship, an absence of passion, or a loss of connection between spouses. Sometimes, even as retaliation for their partner's infidelity, some women claim they cheat to salvage their marriages, though I'm skeptical about that. Nevertheless, it's what researchers studying marital infidelity have reported. Marriage is complex, and relationships require effort. Open marriages, where both spouses consent to having other relationships and carnal partners, seldom survive in the long run. Emotional attachments form, feelings are inevitably hurt, and most couples end up divorcing. Polyamorous marriages are equally complicated, especially when children are involved. The threat of introducing a sexually transmitted disease into the relationship is a constant concern. Personally, I believe monogamy is the best approach in a marriage. If both partners don't agree with it, they should reconsider their commitment to each other or look for different individuals to be in a relationship with. Did I neglect my wife and push her away? Did I fail to provide her with enough attention while I focused on building a life for us? Was I mistaken? I'm uncertain. What I do know is that I felt unhappy about my wife leaving our home to engage in extramarital affairs. She sought things she believed I wasn't providing, but I didn't see her actions leading to an improvement in our marriage. And so, the following week passed by slowly once more. I refrained from calling my wife, and Andrea only sent one text requesting that I forward her mail to her new address. Her communication gave no indication of her desire to salvage our marriage. It was all business. It was evident that she was actively executing her plan to find a boyfriend, or possibly even two, for some enjoyment. The idea crossed my mind to tail her from her apartment to wherever she and Jessica were headed, just to find out who she was meeting. I drove past the apartment multiple times but resisted the urge to stop. I realized I couldn't subject myself to that. I needed to let her make her decision, or she would never truly be my wife again. With each passing day, the likelihood of her returning diminished further. Furthermore, the longer this situation dragged on, the less inclined I was to take her back. A month elapsed with minimal communication between us when, unexpectedly, Andrea showed up at the house unannounced. When her key didn't work in the lock, she rang the doorbell and knocked. I answered the door, maintaining a stoic expression. "Andrea, what brings you here today?" She replied, "Honey, the key doesn't seem to work in the lock." "What's going on?" I responded matter-of-factly, "That's because I changed all the locks." I blocked her from entering when she attempted to. "Come inside." "What do you want, Andrea?" I inquired. She replied, "I came to retrieve a few things I left behind when I moved in with Jess." Once again, her visit wasn't about seeing me. It was purely business-focused on her belongings, with little regard for me or the pain she was causing. She didn't seem to realize the hurt I might be experiencing. Was she that naive or deluded to think I wouldn't care about her carnal encounters with other men, or that I'd eventually take her back? "There are some boxes in the garage with your things that I gathered from around the house." "Why did you do that, honey?" she asked. I let her inside since, after all, it was still partly her home. We proceeded to the garage, where she saw numerous boxes filled with her belongings, ready for her to take. "How long are you planning to stay with Jessica?" I inquired. She replied, "Jessica has been really supportive. I'll be with her for a bit longer. I'm sure it'll only be a few more months, and then I'll be back. A better wife to you, honey. Then we can start a family together." I couldn't help but roll my eyes internally at her comment and feel a sense of disgust. How could she believe that her involvement with other men would somehow make her a better wife and prepare her for motherhood? I had entirely different thoughts on the matter. "So, have you found a boyfriend yet?" I asked bluntly. Andrea blushed in response, and I didn't need an answer. I already knew. She finally admitted, Jess and I have been on some dates with guys from the club we go to, but that's about it. I couldn't resist probing further. How's the physical engaging with your new boyfriends? Andrea turned even redder and began searching through the boxes for her belongings. I left the garage and returned to the kitchen to have my coffee and read the newspaper. A few minutes later, she emerged with a sizable bag and scanned the kitchen, perhaps expecting chaos after her departure. To her disappointment, it was quite the opposite. I had arranged for a cleaning crew to visit 3 times a week, so the place was spotless. There were no stacks of dirty dishes, no empty beer bottles, and certainly no piles of laundry. The house was in perfect order, and I focused on maintaining my composure despite my wife's decision to pursue relationships with other men. Need anything else, Andrea? I asked, sensing her curiosity about how things were here without her. She replied, So, honey, how have you been since I moved in with Jess? I'm fine, I said. Work keeps me busy and I'm often traveling. Concerned, she probed further. Have you been going out or just staying home alone? And there it was, the crucial question I anticipated. It was time to introduce a twist into the conversation and observe her reaction. I've been keeping busy, I said. I joined a cycling group that meets twice a week for rides. It's been enjoyable, and I've met new people. Afterward, we usually grab a beer and a burger. I made sure to avoid excessive drinking, knowing it wouldn't benefit me. My weight had dropped due to exercise and stress from her actions. Regular physical activity was vital for preventing a breakdown. Her response hinted at more interest in my activities than her initial question implied. She might have begun to realize that her plan wasn't going smoothly. It was possible her loyal husband could meet someone else and no longer need to stay married to her. Her quest to find a boyfriend might have more significant repercussions than she thought. I later found out that Andrea had been seeing 2 men from the club she frequented with Jessica and had been physically engaged with, both of them on multiple occasions. However, neither showed interest in spending quality time with her beyond their encounters. Both men were married and sought only casual fun, using Andrea as their source of entertainment, a classic case of pump and dump. By the 2-month mark, I had accepted the end of my marriage and was ready to proceed with the next phase of my plan. Andrea had been silent for weeks, indicating her lack of concern for me or our marriage. She was free to pursue her desires without any thought of returning home. Even if she did consider coming back, it would be under various conditions, and I wasn't sure if I would accept her return. Adding to my doubts, I learned that she had taken a vacation to the Dominican Republic with one of her boyfriends during the school break. They enjoyed a sun-soaked getaway, supposedly working on their tans and other indulgences. If this was her idea of strengthening our marriage through infidelity, it fell far short of expectations. The influence of Jessica's persuasive stories, painting me as a neglectful husband who had ignored my wife's needs, had swayed Andrea's perspective before she chose to leave our marriage. Now she lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with her dissatisfied divorced friend, and her reputation among colleagues and family members was rapidly declining. When Andrea's mother learned that her daughter had traveled to the Caribbean with another man, she contacted me to inquire about our separation. She likely assumed that we had been having marital issues. I disclosed to her that her daughter had left me to pursue sexual relationships with other men, a revelation she found hard to believe. I encouraged her to talk directly to Andrea to get the truth. Andrea's mother confronted her, asking, "Andrea, why did you leave your home? What's going on between you and Robert? Is he mistreating you?" Andrea responded, "No, Mom, he's not mistreating me, but he doesn't provide the excitement I'm currently seeking from a man. I don't feel desired or attractive to him. I need that feeling of being wanted, so I'm seeking it elsewhere for now. I want to have some fun before Rob and I start a family. I plan to return to him in a few months. When he'll appreciate me more, and everything will be fine, you'll see." Andrea's mother was surprised by her response and earnestly warned her, "Dear, if you engage in extramarital affairs, Robert will not want you as his wife. Cheating on him is the quickest way to end your marriage. Don't you understand that?" "I know Rob loves me, Mom," Andrea countered confidently. "He understands my needs. I'll come back home in a few months, maybe a year at most, and then we'll start a family." "Dear, you need to come back to your senses and return home now," her mother urged, "or there won't be a marriage or a husband waiting for you, and there definitely won't be any children with him. Do you grasp what I'm saying?" "Mom, I'm sure Rob loves me," Andrea insisted, standing firm in her beliefs. Even her mother's sincere efforts couldn't sway her. Therefore, adopting the mindset of "what's good for the goose is good for the gander," I decided to explore the possibility of a life without her. It had been about 3 months since Andrea left, and it was time for me to move on. Summoning courage, I asked a woman I knew from cycling for a date. mainly seeking female companionship and a break from the monotonous routine I had endured since my wife moved out. My daily routine revolved around work, the gym, cycling, and sleep, repeating day after day as I waited for this chaos to cease. That was my life. Part of me held on to hope that Andrea would come to her senses and end this absurdity by returning home. However, it seemed unlikely. I had to face the reality that she probably wouldn't come back, at least not as the wife I married or the woman I once knew. It seemed she was relishing her newfound freedom, seeking the excitement and validation as a woman that had been lacking in our marriage. Echoing the motivations psychologists attribute to married women who cheat on their husbands. So I decided to arrange a date without appearing overly desperate or randomly hitting on someone that might seem too odd. I wanted to get to know the people in my cycling group and have them know me before considering inviting one of the women on a date. I wanted it to be a genuine connection, not a sympathy date. Most of my cycling friends were aware of my separation from my wife, and I suspected that some might even know about Andrea's active dating life. In a city not that large, word tends to spread. When I asked Diane, one of the women in the group, to join me for tea or a drink, I was pleasantly surprised when she agreed. I suggested a casual Saturday night outing to a nice place and planned for us to go kayaking on a nearby lake before dinner. I had some experience with kayaking from a few years back, so I knew what to do. Diane had never kayaked before, but she showed interest, and we agreed on the plan. So it became a date. We had an enjoyable kayaking adventure covering approximately 10 miles in about 3 hours. Later, we dined at a charming restaurant where I ordered a craft beer with steak and fries, while Diane chose white wine with pasta. The atmosphere was relaxed and laid back, with no pressure. We concluded the evening with ice cream from a waterfront stand, and I drove her home. I expressed my delight at the evening, intending to give her a kiss on the cheek, but she surprised me by leaning in and kissing me on the lips. It was a pleasant and unexpected moment. To avoid seeming too eager, I waited until our regular Tuesday cycling meetup to suggest another date. Surprisingly, Diane expressed concern that my lack of communication meant I didn't enjoy our time together. I assured her that I had a wonderful time and cherished our outing and her company. We arranged a Saturday date for a round of golf. Having read online about the delicate balance of texting and calling to maintain interest, I sent Diane a text on Friday, expressing my excitement for our golf game and proposing a pickup time, offering her the option to meet at the golf club if she preferred. She preferred I pick her up, so we settled on an early afternoon time. Our time on the golf course was enjoyable, despite our amateur golf skills. That evening, we dined at my place, enjoying a barbecue and a bottle of wine. As the night grew late and I prepared to drive her home, Diane took the car keys from me, placed them on the kitchen counter, and asked to see the bedroom. The next morning, I awoke beside a striking woman, Diane, her arm resting on my chest. She had long, dark hair, captivating green eyes, and flawless skin, with a small scar on her chin adding character to her lovely face. Standing tall at around 5 feet 11 inches, she maintained a slender figure, likely weighing around 140 lbs. Her occupation as a nurse in the pediatric department showcased her compassion for others. From the moment we met, her authentic nature and magnetic charm drew me in. We enjoyed breakfast on my patio, and our conversation eventually turned to my plans and the possibility of divorce. Though sensitive, I understood her need to clarify my intentions before investing emotionally in our connection. No woman wants to invest time in a man who might reconcile with his estranged wife soon. As I explained Andrea's peculiar justification for leaving, Diane's expression confirmed what I suspected. She didn't believe Andrea would return. Her insight nudged me toward the next phase of my plan. On Monday morning, I contacted my lawyer to assign an investigator to the case. I wanted to know how many men Andrea was involved with before serving her with divorce papers. It turned out she was dating multiple men, mostly married, gathering at Jessica's apartment for post-club gatherings. 2 weeks later, Andrea received the divorce petition, marking the start of a tumultuous period. Per that night, she showed up at the house, visibly distressed, holding a large brown envelope. I greeted her at the door, asking, "Andrea, what brings you here tonight?" She replied, "Sweetheart, a guy delivered these papers to me today. Why did you file for divorce? I mentioned I'd be home soon, possibly even this week. We can start planning for that baby we discussed." Inviting her inside, I gestured for her to sit in the kitchen, explaining, "It's too late for that now, Andrea. I made it clear when you left that I didn't want you to go, but you chose to leave." Attempting to justify herself, she said, "Honey, I explained that I needed to discover myself and feel confident." Cutting her off with a touch of sarcasm, I asked, "So do you feel confident now? Are you fulfilled as a woman? Have you explored your desire and new relationships, met intriguing people, had your fair share of physically engaged encounters? Growing increasingly frustrated, I pressed on, because it certainly seems like it to me. I've hardly heard from you since you left. You didn't even bother to call me on my birthday, probably too busy with one of your flings in the Dominican Republic that week. Your own mother reached out to me, wondering why you didn't even bother to call her on Mother's Day. Have you spent this entire time chasing after physical pleasure? She pleaded. Honey, I love you so much, and I realize I may have gone too far. I'm coming back home today. I stood my ground. No, you're not. Honey, what are you talking about? I'm still your wife, and this is still my home. I'm going back to Jess's place to gather my belongings, and I'll be back in a few hours. I clarified. Actually, you can't. Did you go through all the papers in that package you got? Toward the end. There's a judge's ruling stating that you're prohibited from being within 500 feet of this house until the divorce is completed. Technically, you're breaking that court order by being here now. I won't push it, but you need to go, and we can handle this legally to figure things out. Andrea was gradually grasping the gravity of our marriage vows, which encompassed promises such as love, respect, cherish, faithfulness, and the vital component of fidelity. I made it clear that this house didn't hold sentimental value for me. If she wanted it, that was fine. My half, nearly $150,000, was almost paid off, so she could purchase it for that amount. However, if she wasn't willing to pay, we would sell it and divide the proceeds. It was a simple arrangement, but for now she wasn't returning while I stayed in the house. I escorted her to the door, closed, and locked it behind her. A month later, without the need for a court appearance, we quietly settled our divorce. Andrea received her rightful half of our assets. We sold the house, and I moved forward with my life. Andrea resumed her routine, but I heard from a friend that her charter school had advised her to keep her personal life more discreet. Some parents had learned of her involvement with multiple men in the area and were uncomfortable with her teaching their children. Particularly outspoken were the mothers, who seemed especially uneasy about the situation, suspecting some of the fathers may have been involved with her. Subsequently, Andrea was diagnosed with a sexually transmitted disease, not life-threatening but requiring a year of abstinence, which wasn't a concern as she was already pregnant. It appeared one of her partners had fathered the child. Andrea's failure to consistently take birth control, her frequent hard drink consumption, and the lack of contraceptive use were contributing factors. The father remained unidentified, but bore a striking resemblance to one of the teachers at her school, a married man. My divorce was finalized, freeing me from Andrea. It has been about a year since the turmoil with her began. I bought a new house, got promoted at work, and, most importantly, Diane and I are now living together. We're excited to share two big announcements. We're getting married this summer, and we're expecting to become parents around Christmas.
It all started with something seemingly ordinary. My wife had some unresolved legal matters hanging over her for a while. They weren't urgent, but they still needed attention. She mentioned to me one evening that her friend, a lawyer, was returning from vacation the following week. Apparently, as soon as her friend arrived, they planned to have what she called a girls' consultation. I raised an eyebrow and asked what that entailed. She said they'd likely head to a cafe, spread out the documents, and go over everything together. I shrugged. It made sense. I told her that was good timing because I'd been planning to fully disassemble and clean the engine on my car. I figured I'd invite my dad over, crack open a couple of beers, and make a day of it. She smiled, said she was glad I wouldn't just be lounging around doing nothing, and that was that. That evening, I decided to sit down with my laptop to order the car parts one needed. She was on the couch, watching a movie. As I opened the browser, I noticed something odd in the search history, a dictionary of basic legal terms. I turned to her and asked, "Do you really need to brush up on legal terminology for your meeting with your friend?" She nodded without hesitation and said, "Yes, of course." I didn't want to look clueless, so I went through some basics. It seemed plausible enough. I didn't think much of it and went back to browsing engine parts. The day her friend was supposed to return arrived. I woke up early, not from my alarm, but because of the noise coming from our bedroom. My wife was rushing around, clearly in a hurry. She was dressed in a black knee-length skirt and a crisp white blouse, an outfit that looked more corporate than casual. It reminded me of scenes from TV shows about high-powered office meetings. She noticed I was awake and quickly said, "I have to run, I'm already late." Before I could ask anything else, she was out the door. I decided not to dwell on it and instead called my father to confirm our plans. A little later, he arrived, and we set to work on the engine. It felt good to be busy with something tangible, something that made sense. Midway through our work, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my wife, a photo. The image showed a cluttered cafe table covered with papers, folders, and scattered notes. But one thing caught my eye immediately. The corner of the image had the edge of a pair of men's trousers. Someone was sitting next to her. I frowned. She had been pretty clear about it just being her and her friend. I showed my father the photo, and he just shrugged. Could be anyone, he said, and went back to fiddling with the engine. He wasn't wrong. It could have been anyone. But it still nagged at me. I decided not to jump to conclusions and told myself I'd ask her about it when she got home. We finished working on the engine later that afternoon, and by evening my wife returned home. She seemed relaxed, even cheerful. I let her settle in and talk about her day without interrupting. After a while, I casually brought up the photo. "Who was sitting next to you in the cafe?" I asked. She looked confused and said, "What are you talking about?" I explained what I had seen in the photo, the edge of the trousers. She laughed lightly and said, "Oh, that." The cafe was absolutely packed. It's one of those trendy Instagram places, and we could barely find a table. A family was sitting next to us, and the father couldn't fit comfortably at their table, so he sat beside me instead. She then pulled out her phone and showed me another photo, one she had taken from a wider angle. The cafe was indeed packed to the brim with people. Tables crammed together, servers squeezing through narrow aisles. It looked chaotic. She wasn't lying about the place being overcrowded. I nodded and said, "Okay, makes sense." But something still didn't sit quite right. After she went to shower, I noticed the folder she had brought back with her sitting on the kitchen table. I couldn't resist. I opened it and leafed through the documents. To my surprise, they were mostly blank templates, standard forms with placeholders and instructions. There were no notes, no filled-in sections, nothing that indicated hours of work had gone into them. Later that night, I asked her, "If you spent the whole day working, why are these documents blank?" She didn't flinch. "My friend gave me those templates to study," she said. She told me to get familiar with them before we move forward. The filled-in one stayed with her. She then pulled out her phone again and showed me another picture. This time, it was a close-up of the filled-in documents. I stared at the image, trying to make sense of the legal jargon, but honestly, it was incomprehensible to me. Legal documents always looked like some cryptic code. Lawyers are like translators between normal people and the law, she joked as she closed her phone. The explanation sounded reasonable. Everything seemed to add up, even if the unease in my chest hadn't fully disappeared. She picked up the folder, tucked it under her arm, and said she had things to do. As she walked out of the room, I realized I had nothing else to ask. Everything she said made sense, and yet, there was still something there, something intangible, that I couldn't quite put my finger on. But I let it go. At least for now. The next morning, I found myself glancing at her folder again while sipping my coffee. I couldn't stop wondering about those documents, the cafe, and the photo. But life went on, and I pushed it to the back of my mind. For now, at least. The weekend finally arrived after what felt like an endless week at work. My office had been consumed by a massive project, and as usual, the heavy lifting fell on the shoulders of those who actually got things done. I barely saw home during the week, and when I did, it was only to catch a few hours of sleep before diving back into the chaos. By the time I walked through the door that Saturday, I was ready to unwind. But as I entered, I noticed my wife was already halfway dressed, carefully selecting her accessories in front of the mirror. She was putting more effort into her outfit than usual. Naturally, I asked where she was headed. Without missing a beat, she explained that her mother had called her earlier in the day with an invitation for a little outing. According to my wife, her mom, now in her later years, had always dreamed of dressing elegantly and strolling through the charming streets of the city. Apparently, her father was tied up with home repairs, so her mother decided to seize the day and invited my wife along. My wife described it in a way that made it sound completely innocent, even sweet. She even showed me a picture her mother had sent, an older woman in a lovely pastel outfit, beaming at the camera. I nodded and let her go about her plans. If anything, it gave me an opportunity to have a bit of time for myself. I had a stash of homemade cutlets in the fridge, a case of beer, and a few friends who could be convinced to swing by for an impromptu gathering. A quick round of texts later, plans were set in motion. One of my friends even promised to bring a bottle of expensive whiskey. The evening shaped up nicely, and I figured my wife would be back in time to join us for a drink or two. Hours passed in good company. The cutlets were devoured, the whiskey opened, and the evening air was filled with the sounds of casual laughter and relaxed conversation. At one point, my phone buzzed with a message from my wife. It was a selfie of her and her mother, both smiling at a cozy restaurant table. The image settled any passing doubts I might have had, and I poured myself another drink, content with how the evening was unfolding. Eventually, I heard the faint sound of a car engine pulling into the driveway. It was late, and most of the guys had started to wind down. I excused myself and walked out to meet her. Old habits die hard. I spent a few years in law enforcement, and those instincts never really leave you. Playfully, I stepped in front of her car as she slowed down near the driveway. She rolled to a stop, and I approached, grinning. But then I noticed something odd. The passenger seat was covered in dried mud, large, uneven patches as though someone with heavy boots had been sitting there. My wife's mother, as lovely as she looked in that earlier picture, was not the type to track mud around. Both she and my wife were always meticulously clean, almost obsessively so. Something about those muddy marks didn't sit right. She stepped out of the car, cheerful as ever, and greeted me with a wide smile. Before I could ask anything, I told her to join the guys out back. They were still polishing off the last of the food. She didn't hesitate, practically skipping towards the back patio. I stood by the car for a moment longer, the faint smell of cheap cologne lingering in the cool evening air. I opened the passenger door and leaned in. The scent was unmistakable, stale and synthetic, something that clashed heavily with the clean floral perfume my wife usually wore. The mud was crusted deep into the mat, uneven and splattered as though someone had been sitting there for quite a while. I ran my hand over the seat, but aside from the mud and the smell, there wasn't much else to find. After a few minutes of inspecting, I decided it wasn't worth dwelling on just yet. I shut the car door and headed to the back of the house, where my wife was already entertaining the guests with some story. Her laughter carried through the evening air, and she seemed completely at ease. As the night wore on, the group began to thin out. One by one, my friends said their goodbyes, and eventually, it was just me and my wife left in the quiet glow of the patio lights. I leaned back in my chair, sipping the last of my beer, and casually brought up the mud. "So, did your mom trade her heels for hiking boots halfway through your outing?" I asked with a smirk. She paused, blinked, and then let out a small laugh. "Oh, that." On the way back, there was a soldier on the roadside, waving down cars. Nobody stopped, but I did. He told me his phone had died, and he needed to call a taxi. So I gave him a ride. He'd just gotten back from somewhere. I didn't ask too many questions. The explanation seemed plausible enough. Soldiers aren't exactly known for wearing pristine footwear, and the smell of cologne, well, who's to say what brands they have access to? I nodded, shrugged, and told her she'd done a good deed. We stayed out on the patio a little longer, finishing the last of the food. The night air had turned crisp, and the hum of distant traffic was the only sound breaking the silence. My wife stretched, let out a contented sigh, and mentioned that she had a packed schedule for the coming week. "You're going to be so bored without me around," she said with a playful grin. We cleared the table, rinsed the dishes, and eventually made our way to bed. As I lay there in the dark, I found myself replaying the day in my mind, the mud, the cologne, the soldier. Everything fit together neatly enough, yet a faint itch of doubt remained. But for now, it was enough. We turned off the lights, and sleep came quickly. Whatever questions lingered could wait for another day. The day started off uneventfully, the kind of quiet normalcy that I had started to appreciate lately. I was sipping my coffee and scrolling through my phone when my wife's ringtone suddenly cut through the calm. She answered immediately, her voice soft and sympathetic. I could only hear fragments of her conversation, but the way she kept saying, "Oh no, that's awful, and I'm so sorry," made me sit up straighter. My first thought was that someone had died. I raised my eyebrows, silently asking her what had happened, but she just shook her head, signaling for me to wait. As the call continued, she began moving around the room, pulling a dress from the closet and starting her makeup routine. It wasn't hurried, she was focused, deliberate. When the call ended, I asked her directly what was going on. She sighed and explained that her friend's child had fallen sick and her friend had begged her to cover a night shift at the office. Apparently, the friend was desperate and my wife couldn't say no. I frowned and asked if her office even operated at night. I had always assumed the place shut down after regular hours. She quickly reassured me, saying that night shifts were rare but not unheard of. Some people even pulled all-nighters at their desks, she said. IT workers, in particular, apparently thrived in those odd hours. She mentioned one guy, chubby, socially awkward, who was practically nocturnal. I made a light joke about her now joining the ranks of those nocturnal creatures, but she didn't laugh. Instead, she told me that the office had its own rhythm at night, a different vibe altogether. She then added, somewhat sternly, that she always wanted to look presentable, no matter the time of day or who was around. "I might look like a mess in front of you," she said, "but not in front of others." It was her final word on the matter. She grabbed her purse and keys and walked out the door. The night felt longer than usual. I tried to distract myself, watched a movie, scrolled through social media, but I couldn't shake a vague sense of unease. At around 2 a.m., sleep completely evaded me. On impulse, I picked up my phone and called her. No answer. A moment later, a message popped up instead. She said she couldn't talk because one of the IT guys was fixing the server, and she needed to wait until he was done to send out some documents. I leaned back in my chair, rereading the message. It wasn't particularly odd, but something about it didn't sit right with me. I got up to make some tea, hoping it would calm my nerves. As I set the kettle on, my eyes fell on her work badge sitting by the kitchen counter. It was always there, her little routine of leaving it by the same spot every day. But if she was at the office, and if entry to her building was controlled by badges, how had she gotten in? I considered calling her again but decided against it. I was tired, my thoughts were muddled, and I knew pressing her now would only lead to an argument. Instead, I told myself I'd ask her in the morning, once we were both rested and clear-headed. When she arrived home around sunrise, she looked exhausted but oddly composed. I waited until she had settled in before asking the question that had been bothering me all night. "How did you get into the office without your badge?" She blinked, as if caught off guard by the question, then let out a short laugh. "Are you serious?" "My friend gave me her badge. That way, the system would clock her in, and she wouldn't lose her shift credit." She even showed me a text exchange with her friend, a straightforward conversation where the friend had asked her to swing by and pick up her badge earlier that day. It seemed plausible, but something still lingered. As she moved past me, I caught a faint scent, cheap cologne, sharp and overwhelming. It wasn't hers, and it wasn't something I'd smelled in our home before. I asked about it directly. Her response was immediate but defensive. "Oh, God, don't start. Something weird happened last night." She then launched into an explanation about the IT guy. Apparently, when the server went down, he came over to her desk and started chatting. According to her, he was awkward, desperate even. He told her he had no luck with women and asked her for advice on relationships. She said he was wearing an absurd amount of cologne, and when he got emotional, teary-eyed, even, she had lightly patted him on the shoulder to comfort him. The way she told the story, it sounded plausible enough. Awkward men with poor social skills exist in every office, and it wouldn't be unheard of for someone in a stressful night shift to overshare or act out emotionally. Still, something gnawed at me. She even showed me a message from the guy. It was a short apology, sorry if I was weird last night. Thanks for the advice. You're really kind. It was innocuous, even pathetic in its simplicity. She hadn't replied to it. I nodded slowly, feeling a little foolish for pressing the issue so hard. Her explanation ticked every box, it was logical, detailed, and supported by evidence. Still, there was something intangible, something that didn't quite sit right. We finished breakfast in near silence. She mentioned her packed schedule for the coming week, listing meetings, errands, and appointments she needed to handle. Then she looked at me for a moment, her brow slightly furrowed. You've been acting strange lately, she said. It's like you're seeing things that aren't there. Are you okay? I shrugged and said, maybe. But inside, I knew one thing for certain, something wasn't adding up. The cologne, the badge, the IT guy's strange behavior. None of it outright contradicted her story, but none of it fully aligned either. As she cleared the table and started her day, I told myself I'd pay more attention moving forward. The details, the little things, they were starting to tell a story of their own. And I intended to listen. About a week had passed since the night shift incident, and curiosity started eating at me. My wife had mentioned that her friend promised her some kind of special gift for covering that shift. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now it was starting to gnaw at the back of my mind. One evening, while we were having dinner, I decided to ask her outright about it. She shrugged and said she wasn't sure yet, but that her friend had hinted at something exciting. The next day, I came home from work, and my wife practically jumped into my arms, squealing with excitement. Apparently, the long-awaited gift had been revealed. Her friend had managed to get her a certificate for yoga sessions with some famous instructor who had just arrived from India. According to her, he was practically a guru, with generations of yoga tradition flowing through his veins. She gushed about his experience and the opportunity to learn from someone so authentic. She also made it clear that she wanted me to join her at some point. She said it would do me good, that I'd been getting soft around the middle, and that a little movement wouldn't kill me. I played along, nodded, and asked when she planned to start. Tomorrow, she exclaimed with a big smile. She spent the rest of the evening preparing her gym bag, laying out a new yoga mat, and trying on different combinations of athletic wear. The following day, she dressed in tight leggings and a sporty top, grabbed her mat, and headed out. It became a routine. Every day, she would leave at the same time, dressed in her yoga outfit, and return hours later, looking refreshed and cheerful. She even demonstrated a few yoga poses in our living room, talking about how much better she felt and how this was already improving her life. At first, I bought into it. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and everything seemed to check out. But after 2 weeks of this routine, something happened that cracked the facade. I was scrolling through Instagram one morning after she had left for her session, and I noticed a post from the yoga studio she attended. They announced that the studio would be closed for several days due to technical issues. My first thought was practical, maybe she hadn't checked their social media before heading out. Maybe she'd find out when she arrived and come straight home. But an hour passed. Then 2. She didn't return. When she finally came back, she walked in with her usual bright smile, chatting away about how amazing the session had been and how the breathing exercises were practically life-changing. I waited until she finished her story before asking, as casually as possible, so, how was the session if the studio was closed? She paused only for a second before launching into an explanation. Apparently, the closure hadn't stopped them from practicing. According to her, a group of students and the instructor decided to relocate the session to a nearby children's playground. It was, she said, an improvised but effective solution. Her story was smooth, too smooth. I watched her carefully as she explained how the playground setting added a new element of challenge and how they all laughed about it afterward over coffee. She even pulled out her phone and showed me some photos and videos from the supposed outdoor session. Her friend had apparently filmed snippets of the training. Everything lined up. The photos looked real, the videos seemed candid, and her explanation made sense. But there was something about the way she spoke, the casual confidence in her voice, that felt rehearsed. Not overly so, but just enough to plant a seed of doubt in my mind. It wasn't even about what she said, it was about how she said it. There was no hesitation, no sign of her being caught off guard. If anything, she seemed overly prepared, as if she had run through the scenario in her head multiple times. It was polished, airtight, and frustratingly believable. I realized then that confronting her directly wasn't going to work. Every time I asked a question, she had an answer ready, often with photographic evidence to back it up. If I wanted to get to the truth, I needed to change tactics. Pushing her would only make her more careful, more guarded. No, I needed her to lower her defenses. I decided to play the fool. My plan was simple: stop asking questions, stop showing concern, and start acting like I didn't care. I'd let her believe that I was checked out, distracted, or just plain oblivious. If she thought I wasn't paying attention, she might start slipping up. To sell it, I started being intentionally careless. I'd leave dishes in the sink, forget to take out the trash, and let little tasks around the house pile up. I stopped asking her about her day in any detail and began responding to her stories with absent-minded nods or vague comments. At first, she seemed a little annoyed. She'd huff and roll her eyes when I forgot something or brushed off one of her yoga stories. But eventually, she started to relax. She stopped being as guarded with her explanations, and her usual polish started to fade just slightly. I noticed small inconsistencies in her stories, little details that didn't quite add up. It was working. The more relaxed she became, the more confident I felt in my approach. I couldn't put my finger on it yet, but I was certain something wasn't right. And sooner or later, she'd slip up. My goal wasn't to confront her head-on or accuse her without evidence. That would only drive her further into secrecy. No, I was going to be patient. I'd keep up the act, keep her thinking I wasn't paying attention, and when the moment was right, when the cracks in her story became too big to ignore, I'd be ready. In my mind, the plan was solid. If she felt safe, if she believed I was no longer suspicious, she'd let her guard down completely. And when that happened, I'd finally have my answers. I started staying late at work more frequently. Whenever my wife asked about it, I'd sigh heavily and tell her that I was giving her space because I realized I'd been too controlling. Honestly, I was starting to irritate myself with this act, but I could see it working. The colder and more detached I became, the more it seemed to push her into a space where she felt free, too free, perhaps. She became bolder in her criticisms of me, pointing out things she didn't like about our relationship and how I'd changed. While she continued going to her so-called yoga sessions, I began spending more evenings with friends. I made sure to seem carefree, relaxed, and as if I didn't have a care in the world. During one of these evenings, I shared the details of the situation with my friends. We talked openly, and eventually, we came up with a strategy, a different approach to shake things up. I invited some of these friends over to our home for a casual gathering. Importantly, these were the single friends, the ones who knew how to flirt and weren't afraid to do so. Before they arrived, I told them to compliment my wife openly, to pay her attention, and to act as if I wasn't even there. Meanwhile, I would remain utterly indifferent, almost dismissive. The evening played out exactly as planned. My friends laid it on thick with their compliments, and I made sure not to react. I kept my face neutral, my responses short, and my attention elsewhere. I could see the confusion growing in her eyes as the night went on. When the guests finally left, she wasted no time. She told me we needed to talk, seriously. I agreed without hesitation. She let loose, saying she wanted attention from me, not from my friends. She said I had become distant, weak, and unengaged, and she didn't recognize me anymore. I listened, nodding occasionally, but inside, I knew I had struck exactly where I wanted to. The cracks were showing, and her carefully maintained facade was beginning to crumble. After that conversation, things started to shift. She grew sloppier with her stories, her excuses became inconsistent, and most importantly, she didn't seem to realize it herself. She was unraveling, and I was watching it all happen in real time. That's when I decided to set the next phase of my plan in motion. I told her, offhandedly over dinner one evening, that I'd been assigned a week-long business trip. She barely reacted. She sighed and said something about being alone again, about how she'd be like a woman without a husband. I gave her a guilty look and said it was unavoidable. She brushed it off with a shrug, and I knew right then that she was planning something. The night before my supposed departure, I packed a small suitcase and made sure to leave it in plain sight. I kissed her goodbye in the morning, got in my car, and drove away. But I didn't go far. Instead, I stayed with one of my closest friends. Over drinks that evening, I shared the next phase of my plan. My friend leaned back in his chair, grinning. "You should come back early," he said. "Catch her off guard. And when you confront her, don't yell, don't accuse, just act defeated, like you've already given up. Make her think you're too weak to fight back." It was a brilliant idea. I spent 2 days away, keeping in touch with her through casual texts and short calls. She sounded normal, cheerful even. But I could tell something was off. On the third day, I packed up my things and drove home without warning. When I walked through the door, she froze. "You're back early," she said, her voice tight. I didn't respond directly. Instead, I slumped onto the couch, let out a deep sigh, and mumbled something about being tired and miserable. Then, in the same breath, I started asking, quietly, almost pitifully, about her outings, her yoga classes, and her late returns. She snapped almost immediately. "Why are you acting like this? Are you spying on me? What's wrong with you?" she said, her voice rising with every word. I didn't raise my voice. I stayed slouched, staring at the floor, muttering about feeling pathetic and confused. And that's when she lost it. She stormed off to the bedroom, yanking open drawers and pulling out clothes. She grabbed her makeup bag, her purse, and began getting ready in front of the mirror with furious determination. She was applying lipstick with sharp, aggressive strokes, her hands trembling slightly. "Where are you going?" I asked softly, keeping my voice low and unthreatening. "Somewhere I'm appreciated," she snapped, glaring at me through the mirror. I nodded slowly, pretending to process her words as if they had shattered what little self-esteem I had left. Inside, though, I was smirking. The act was working beautifully. She finished getting ready, grabbed her bag, and stormed out the door, slamming it shut behind her. I sat there on the couch for a long moment, staring at the empty doorway. I had played my role perfectly, the image of a broken, weak man who had been pushed too far. And it had worked. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't guilt. This wasn't remorse. This was frustration and panic. As the sound of her car faded into the distance, I leaned back against the couch and let out a slow breath. I had used the illusion of weakness to break through her defenses, to shake her carefully maintained composure. And in that moment, I knew this was the beginning of the end. The moment of reckoning arrived on a cold, grey morning. She stumbled into the house at dawn, the smell of alcohol heavy in the air. Her makeup was smeared, her hair disheveled, and her eyes bloodshot. She barely managed to kick off her heels before shouting something incoherent in my direction. Then, with venom in her voice, she said the words that would set everything into motion: "Go fetch my underwear from my lover. He'll teach you how to please me properly." Her words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. I stared at her, my expression carefully neutral. Inside, though, I was seething. But I kept my act together. I nodded slowly, muttered a soft, "All right, give me the address," and waited. She spat out an address between drunken hiccups, and I calmly grabbed my keys and walked out the door. The moment I was outside, I pulled out my phone and started dialing. 4 of my closest friends picked up within minutes. They didn't ask many questions, they just listened, understood, and agreed to meet me immediately. It wasn't long before we were packed into my car, driving through empty streets toward the address she had given me. We pulled up to a modest apartment building in a rundown part of town. The building looked tired, its paint peeling, windows fogged with grime. My fists clenched as I walked up to the door and knocked. After a few seconds, it creaked open, and there he was, the yoga instructor, the so-called spiritual guide from India. His eyes widened when he saw me and the group of men standing behind me. We stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The air was thick with cheap incense, and scattered yoga mats covered the floor. My friend spread out, silently blocking any escape route. I stood in front of him, staring him down until he looked away. "Start talking," I said. "All of it. Every secret, every lie, every scheme." His face crumpled almost immediately. The man started sobbing, his shoulders shaking as he begged for mercy. He mumbled something about returning money, about making things right. That's when it clicked. Money? Why was he talking about money? I leaned closer, my voice low and steady. "What money are you talking about?" Through choked sobs, he confessed. His entire yoga enterprise was a scam. He had been taking money from students under false pretenses, promising enlightenment and exclusive sessions with ancestral wisdom that he never actually provided. It was all an act, a lucrative act. I pulled out my phone and started recording. I made him repeat every word, every confession, every dirty detail about his scam. The more he spoke, the clearer my new plan became. Once I had enough evidence recorded, I shifted gears. "Now, tell me about my wife." He hesitated, glancing at my friends, but one sharp look from me was enough to make him start talking again. He admitted to the affair, every detail, every lie, every alibi they had concocted together. Then, as if to make it all worse, he offered me access to videos and text exchanges. I took them all. Every damning piece of evidence was now in my possession. By the time he was done talking, there was nothing left to say. My phone was full of confessions and incriminating files. I let silence hang in the air for a moment before delivering one sharp punch across his jaw. He stumbled back, clutching his face, but nobody moved to help him. We dragged him outside, tossed him into the back seat of my car, and drove to the edge of a nearby forest. The place was isolated, quiet, no witnesses, no interruptions. We pulled him out and left him by the side of an old dirt road. He was still sniffling and mumbling apologies as we got back into the car. From the passenger seat, I dialed the police. I kept my voice steady, professional, as I reported a known scam artist operating fraudulent businesses in our city. I forwarded every recording, every piece of evidence I had. Before I even finished speaking, they confirmed that an investigation would be launched immediately. Satisfied, we drove back home. My friends left one by one, their roles in this drama complete. I walked into the house to find my wife sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Her eyes lifted briefly when she saw me, and her expression turned sour. I pulled something out of my jacket pocket and tossed it onto the coffee table. Her underwear, the very item she had mockingly told me to fetch. It landed with a dull sound, and she recoiled slightly, her face twisting with anger and shame. Without saying a word, she got up and stormed upstairs. I heard the bedroom door slam shut, but I didn't follow her. I simply sat down on the couch and exhaled, feeling the weight of the night lift slightly from my shoulders. But the night wasn't over. I picked up my phone again, this time to call my lawyer. I told him I wanted a divorce, effective immediately. He didn't ask for details, he simply said, understood, and promised to start the paperwork. I leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Everything was in motion now, the police investigation, the divorce, and the crumbling facade of my wife's perfect little world. There was one final piece left to play, my revenge against her. It had to be precise, calculated, and final. She had no idea what was coming. And as I sat there in the darkened living room, I couldn't help but smile slightly. The endgame had begun, and she was entirely unprepared. As the divorce papers were being finalized, I shifted my behavior entirely. I became calm, almost serene, but every interaction with her carried a faint edge of something she couldn't quite place, something sharp and unsettling. I would drop comments here and there, offhandedly asking her why her lover hadn't been in touch. Strange, isn't it? No calls, no messages? Doesn't that seem odd to you? Each time, her face would pale, her lips would tighten, and she'd try to brush it off. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew. One evening, after dinner, I brought it up again. Any news from your yoga guru lately? He seems unusually quiet. Her fork clattered against her plate. Her eyes widened, and for the briefest moment, I saw pure fear flash across her face. Why are you saying that? What do you mean? She stammered. I shrugged and said it was just a hunch, just idle speculation. But I let the silence hang heavy between us, letting her stew in her own imagination. The tension built with every passing day. She grew jumpy, irritable, and paranoid. My casual remarks became invisible strings pulling her closer to the inevitable breakdown. I could see it in her eyes every time I spoke. She was terrified of what I might know. Eventually, the weight of it all became too much, and she snapped. What did you do to him? She screamed at me one night, her voice breaking with raw panic. I kept my face blank, feigning innocence. Do to whom? I have no idea what you're talking about. Her hands trembled, her breath came in short, uneven gasps, but I gave her nothing. No answers, no explanations, just silence and an unreadable expression. When the divorce papers finally arrived, I took the envelope and walked calmly into the living room. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone with unfocused eyes. I placed the envelope on the coffee table in front of her and said, "It's time." She froze. Her eyes darted to the papers, then back to me. Slowly, she picked up the envelope with trembling hands and opened it. The realization washed over her like a cold wave, and her face crumpled as the tears began to fall. For a few moments, she sat there sobbing, clutching the papers as if they were the only thing keeping her from falling apart completely. But I wasn't done yet. Do you know where your lover is right now? I asked, my voice calm and measured. She looked up at me, her mascara running down her cheeks, and whispered, "No. I don't know." I leaned slightly closer, letting my words land like a hammer. He's in prison. And do you know why he's there? Her sobs turned into wails. She buried her face in her hands, shaking uncontrollably. I stood there for a moment, watching the mess she had become, before I turned and started gathering her belongings. Piece by piece, I began packing her clothes, shoes, makeup, all the little fragments of her life that had once filled our home. With every item I picked up, I felt lighter. Some things I threw directly onto the lawn outside, letting them scatter in the cold night air. Others, I left neatly stacked by the door. She was still crying as I pulled her suitcase down the stairs. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't say a word. When I opened the front door and gestured for her to leave, she hesitated for just a moment before stepping out into the night. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the empty hallway. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. It was over, or at least, the worst of it was. The next chapter played out in the cold, sterile confines of a courtroom. She tried to play the victim, weaving stories about misunderstandings and regrets. But the evidence I had, the recordings, the photos, the confessions, spoke louder than any of her words. The judge's decision came swiftly. I won. The house, the assets, everything was settled in my favor. She left the courtroom with her head hanging low, her face drained of color. She avoided my gaze as she walked past me, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. After the dust settled, I wasted no time. I sold the house, a place that had once been our home but had turned into a mausoleum of broken trust and betrayal. With the money from the sale, I bought a smaller house in a quieter neighborhood, far away from the places that held memories of her. Moving day felt cathartic. Each box I carried into my new home felt like shedding a layer of dead skin. I painted the walls, replaced the furniture, and filled the space with things that were mine and mine alone. I spent my first night in the new house sitting on the back porch with a drink in my hand, staring up at the sky. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt at peace. The weight of suspicion, deceit, and manipulation had finally lifted. The road to this point had been long, dark, and filled with traps, but I had made it through. I wasn't naive enough to believe that everything would magically fall into place now, but it was a start. There was just one final thread left dangling, Iha. The last piece of the puzzle was my revenge, and it was something she would never see coming. But for now, under the faint glow of distant stars, I allowed myself a moment of quiet victory. The war was over, but the final battle was still to come.